So hey guys, how are you all? Welcome to. So we are back with a brand new movie on What If Dark Naruto Secretly Hide Two Girls with Temari movie, but before we start, be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Now let's begin the story. Hey, Shikamaru. Shikamaru rolled his eyes when he heard the high-pitched voice calling from behind him. Shikamaru. Wait up. The voice called again, but he kept walking. Stopping to talk to someone now would just be troublesome. Suddenly there was a hand on his shoulder and he stopped. God, Shikamaru, are you deaf? Shikamaru sighed and reluctantly turned around. What do you want, Ino? The blonde kunoichi rolled her eyes. Hokage-sama sent me. She wants to see you in her office, something about a mission. She ran her hands over her short purple skirt to straighten it out and pulled her shirt down a little. He sighed again, put his hands in his pockets. This was supposed to be my day off, how troublesome. Ino scoffed. You always say that. Besides, shinobi never really get a day off. Now stop your complaining and get going. She gave him a light shove and disappeared. Shikamaru yawned and started walking towards the Hokage tower. He looked up at the sky. Why did that old woman have to put me on a mission today? It's such a nice day. All I want to do is take a nap or watch the clouds. Maybe play some shugi with Asuma. There was nothing he could do about it though. Ino was right. He was a shinobi after all. When he got to the Hokage tower, he was escorted to Tsunade-sama's office by one of her Anbu guards. Good to see you, Shikamaru. Tsunade gestured for him to come closer to her desk. HN. Shikamaru shrugged and dragged himself over to her desk. I have a mission? The Hokage nodded. Yes. I'm aware that you were supposed to be off today, but this was a last-minute mission and I couldn't find anyone else to do it. Why couldn't Ino just do it? He would have argued, but truthfully, he was afraid of Tsunade. Whatever. So what's the mission? Tsunade grinned. You are going to escort one of our allies back to her home village. Did she just say, her? Why am I always stuck with the women? They're so troublesome. Sounds easy enough. No one's after her, right? Not at all. She shook her head. It's a long journey and I wouldn't feel right sending her off alone. Shikamaru nodded. You can come in now. The Hokage called. At that moment, the door opened and a kunoichi walked in. She had blonde hair that was pulled into 4 pigtails and carried a giant fan on her back. She smirked. Hello, Shikamaru. Shikamaru was surprised to see her, but he didn't show it. He kept his usual bored, dull face and nodded. Temari. Tsunade rose from her chair. You two can leave whenever you'd like. I suggest not leaving too late though. Goodbye, Temari. She said, and the two blondes shook hands. I'll see you when you get back, Shikamaru. Later, Tsunade-sama. Shikamaru waved his hand as he and Temari left the office. After they left the Hokage tower, they didn't hesitate to leave for the Sand Village. They'd known each other for a long time, about 3 years, but they weren't exactly best friends. Shikamaru wasn't usually a very talkative person, he was more of a thinker. So, he usually let Temari do the talking, which she didn't do much of either. Most of their trip to the Sand Village was silent, not an awkward or weird one, but a nice, comfortable silence. That's the way Shikamaru liked it. Temari, on the other hand, grew bored of silence after a while. They were more than halfway to Suna when she finally spoke. Guess I ruined your day off, huh? She caught him off guard. What? The kunoichi turned to look at him. I heard you talking to the Hokage. You weren't supposed to have any missions today, so I guess I ruined your day off. Oh, she did, but I don't want to hurt her feelings, then she might get mad, and that would be troublesome. Shikamaru laughed a little. I wouldn't say that. In fact, you could say that you made my day better. If I didn't get this mission, I'd probably be bored at home. He smirked. Besides, I'd rather be on this mission than a different one. It could be a lot worse. Temari looked forward as they kept running. I wasn't expecting that. Oh, well, thanks. Sure. They ran in silence the rest of their way to Suna. When they got there, it was still midday. That means I have plenty of time to get back to Konoha before sundown. Okay. I guess I'll see you around, Temari. A small frown appeared on Temari's face. Actually, today was probably the last time I'll be in Konoha. Shikamaru's usually plain face was now wide with shock. What do you mean? We're allies, shouldn't we be going to each other's villages a lot? That's true. However, I won't be the one coming to Konoha anymore. Gaara and Kankuro don't think it's a good idea to be sending me back and forth between the villages anymore since I'm the Kazukage's sister. She rolled her eyes. So we'll be sending other shinobi. I see. I'm never going to see her again. He collected himself so his face was back to his plain self. That's for the best then. I guess this is goodbye then. I guess it is. I'll never see him again. Shikamaru put out his hand. Goodbye, Temari. Temari smirked and ignored his hand. I might as well. Instead, she walked up to him and kissed him, right on the lips. It was nothing special, but if she was never going to see him again, she wanted him to remember her. She stepped back after a few seconds. Goodbye, Shikamaru. With that, she ran into her village, leaving Shikamaru alone and speechless. It was a nice day and Shikamaru was going out with his ex-teammates, Ino and Choji, for lunch. They got together like this once a week, every week. Today they were eating at the Ichiraku ramen shop. They were still waiting for their food. Shikamaru felt like it was taking an eternity. Gee, Shikamaru, you sure are quiet today. Choji was waving his hand in Shikamaru's face. He shrugged. Why did his friends have to be so troublesome? Because I have nothing to say, he stated indifferently. Ino scoffed. Huh? You have nothing to say? That's a first? Shikamaru glared at the kunoichi. Shut up, pig. He didn't care if he insulted her. Her ego was so big nothing really bothered her anymore. Now, let's eat in peace. Choji interjected. Just as he said this, their food arrived. Shikamaru could see the excited glint in Choji's eye. Look at all this delicious ramen. It would be a shame if we let it get cold. With that, he started gorging himself. Ino rolled her eyes at Shikamaru. You're right, Choji-kun, she said in a sweet, innocent voice. Gag me. HN. Shikamaru sighed and turned towards his bowl of ramen. After a few minutes, Ino stood up. I have to go manage the shop, she announced. I'll see you tonight, Choji-kun. The blonde leaned over and kissed the pudgy shinobi. Shikamaru made a gagging noise and Ino backed off and glared at him once more. Later, pineapple head. He ignored the last comment as she skipped off to her father's flower shop. You should find yourself a girlfriend, Shikamaru. Choji edged as soon as Ino was out of earshot. She tended to turn conversations like this into setting up a blind date for Shikamaru. Shikamaru groaned. He hated when Choji brought this up. He just never considered dating. After seeing how his father, a great shinobi, could become so weak around his mother, he swore off women forever. His friend just laughed. I'm sorry, Shikamaru, but you always look so lonely compared to everyone else. First there was Naruto and Sakura, then Hinata and Kiba last winter, Ino and myself. Neji and Tenten got together a month or two ago, I think. Even Lee has a. Choji. Shikamaru elbowed him in the ribs. If you're trying to cheer me up, it's not working. The other shinobi chuckled. I'm not trying to hurt your feelings or anything, Shikamaru. I just don't want my best friend to end up all lonely for the rest of his life. Women are so troublesome. I don't want to end up like my father and end up marrying a naggy, controlling woman. He laughed. I'm happy with the way things are. Choji just shrugged and took another huge mouthful of ramen. Whatever you say, Shikam. Just then, Shikamaru's father, Shikaku, interrupted them. Hello, Choji. He acknowledged. Shikamaru, the Hokage needs to see you, now. Both Shikamaru and Choji looked at the older shinobi. What's up? Choji asked before Shikamaru did. Shikaku shrugged. I'm sure she has a good reason for it though. Now get going, you know she doesn't like to wait. Shikamaru sighed. Always so troublesome. He stood up and said goodbye to his father and friend. I wonder what she wants this time, the shinobi thought to himself. When he arrived at the Hokage Tower, he noticed that Tsunade was waiting for him. That's unusual. What was more unusual was that the older kunoichi seemed to be fidgeting. To anyone else it would have gone unnoticed, but Shikamaru was a genius after all. It didn't take a genius to figure out that this was going to be an interesting day, and a troublesome one. As he got closer to the Hokage, he tried thinking of what the mission could possibly be. He thought of several things, but none of them were probable. There was nothing that could keep Shikamaru busier than an unsolved problem. He remembered ruefully back to the days when his deceased sensei, Asuma, would keep him entertained with mind games. Shikamaru snapped out of his memories when the Hokage addressed him. Good afternoon, Shikamaru. The Hokage said. Shikamaru noticed the uneasy glint in her eye. However, he was surprised at how well she held her composure, even though she was obviously nervous. Do I have a mission? He didn't bother greeting her. He wanted her to get right to the point. For some unknown reason he felt like he would soon be doing something very unpleasant. Maybe an assassination. The thought made him shudder. The Hokage nodded. I'll explain on the way to my office. Her long blonde pigtails swished as she turned to walk down the hallway. Something about them reminded Shikamaru of someone. He just couldn't figure out who. Great, another mystery, it's going to be a long day. Shikamaru slowly turned and followed her. I'm sure you've heard the rumor going around that our alliance with the Sand Village is crumbling. She spoke as they started walking up a flight of stairs. He noticed her voice was hard as she said this. It felt like she was trying to mask something. Sadness, maybe? No, I don't think that's it. I've heard a rumor going around that Tsunade is planning to attack Konoha. He shrugged and rolled his eyes, but that's obviously not true, considering the bond Naruto shares with Gaara. Tsunade nodded. You would be correct. However, the rest of Fire Country doesn't believe that matters. They think that the rumors are true. So, it was a matter of allegiance. What could he do to prove that the Sand Village was on their side? He was no diplomat. I see. Shikamaru looked at her curiously, scrutinizing her face to see what she was hiding. But what does this have to do with me? They were at her office door now, but they didn't go in. Instead, the Hokage turned to face Shikamaru. How do you feel about commitment? His face twisted in confusion. I commit to things, even if they are usually troublesome. You should know that by now, Tsunade-sama. I am a shinobi after all, aren't I? He studied her face for another moment. I still don't understand where this is going. If you could just explain. She let out a deep sigh and put her hand on the door handle. Nara, Shikamaru, you are about to be a married man. Before he had any time to react, the door was open and Tsunade was standing next to Shikamaru as he looked inside her office. Of course, he was already in shock and his eyes were probably abnormally large, but his jaw dropped when he saw who was on the other side of the door. Sitting in Tsunade's chair was the Case-Cage himself, and on his left was his brother, Kankuro, the puppet master. Shikamaru paid little attention to them though. They weren't the ones who caught his attention. His gaze was drawn to the girl standing on Gaara's right. The blonde kunoichi with 4 pigtails and the giant fan. Now he remembered. She's the one who kissed me all those years ago. Shikamaru collected himself as he recalled the memory. How could I have forgotten her? She was staring at him, with her deep blue eyes. She looks different somehow, he noticed and smirked. In a good way though. Then it hit him. Nara, Shikamaru, you are about to be a married man. Temari was here, she was from the Sand Village, and together they were going to prove their country's alliance was still intact. They were going to get married. If Shikamaru had been paying attention, he may have noticed Kankuro laughing to himself, probably in amusement, or Shizune pacing nervously around the room. If Shikamaru hadn't been lost in his subconscious, he may have noticed the Hokage rubbing her temples in frustration. If he wasn't so flabbergasted, he may have noticed that Gaara was doing the same thing. If he himself wasn't so filled with mixed emotions, he may have even noticed that Temari was looking at him disapprovingly. I have to marry that scrawny thing. The blonde scoffed. Tsunade-sama. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but if my mission is to get married, can't I at least choose my husband? Kankuro elbowed the kunoichi and Gaara gave her a disapproving look. I'm serious. Look at him. Temari pointed at Shikamaru. He looks even less excited to be here than I am, and that's saying something. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. She had no idea. She was about to speak again, but Kankuro put his hand over her mouth. That's quite enough, Ni-chan. Gaara, who had been silent the entire time, finally opened his mouth. Temari, this is a mission, and just like any other mission you are to do as directed. Temari glared at the both of them. Kankuro didn't have to do that. She also hated when Gaara spoke to her like that, even if he was the Case-Cage. It was aggravating when your younger brother told you what to do. When the siblings were finished their bickering, Tsunade straightened herself and coughed to get their attention. I am ever so sorry, Temari, if Shikamaru doesn't meet your standards. The Hokage said sarcastically and with a hint of anger. Temari bowed her head apologetically. Tsunade didn't react, she just kept on talking. But he's the most qualified for this mission. You see, most shinobi in this village are already romantically involved with someone else. It would seem rather suspicious if they suddenly got married to a different woman. And unless you'd rather get married to an older shinobi, a much older shinobi, then Shikamaru is your only option. Temari considered an older shinobi for a moment, but decided that might turn out badly. She finally shrugged. I guess the beanpole will have to do, better than an old fart at least. Then she mumbled something under her breath Shikamaru couldn't make out. The Hokage nodded at Temari. Then her gaze switched to Shikamaru. He could feel the questioning gaze of everyone in the room. Shikamaru. The Hokage prompted. Shikamaru jolted and woke from the trance he had been in for the past several minutes. Hokage-sama? He straightened himself and put on his usual dull expression as he looked at the Hokage. Do you have any objections to this mission? She questioned, as if she would listen anyway. Of course I have objections, he stated. I have several objections actually. I just won't be so blunt as to mention them. Tsunade didn't question this. Very well, she nodded at both of them. I do apologize to both of you. I know this is very last minute, and I know you haven't had contact in several years. So, to make up for that, I'm giving you a week to get reacquainted before the wedding. She smiled in satisfactory. A week? Temari shouted. A week? Are you? Kankuro had his hand over her mouth again immediately. Ni-chan. Shikamaru held in his rage. Arguing with the Hokage will just be troublesome, he said to himself. Tsunade was glowering at Temari. That's quite enough. If this mission doesn't go as planned, then both our countries will be in danger. You're lucky I'm giving you a week. I would have made it 3 days, however. Shizune was sympathetic enough to make me extend it to a week. If you don't stop your whining, I will go back to my original plan and you'll be married in less than a week's time. Temari sighed and didn't say another word. Shikamaru froze and kept his mouth shut. The Hokage smiled with satisfaction. It looks like we're all on the same page. She paused and stared at the future couple for a long moment and seemed to relax. You know, if you two actually give each other a chance, maybe you'll end up enjoying this mission. Temari scoffed at Tsunade's comment, but knew better than to say anything. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. Let's just get this troublesome mission over with. At least one of you isn't complaining, Tsunade muttered. HN. Shikamaru shrugged and started to turn and walk out of the room. Shikamaru, Tsunade called. He stopped and turned around to look at the Hokage. Temari, this goes for you also. She waited for Temari to look at her before she continued to speak. I don't think you two know how bad I feel about this whole thing. Forcing 2 people to get married is something I never thought I'd have to do, and if there were any other option I would take it. Tsunade-sama. Shikamaru interrupted her. As a shinobi of Konoha, I'm proud to be put on this mission, especially if it means saving an alliance. Tsunade smirked. Even though it's troublesome. Shikamaru laughed a little. Yes, even though it's incredibly troublesome. Temari coughed. Are we done here? I'm afraid not. I'm not quite finished yet. Tsunade sighed. Obviously, if you two are going to get married, you can't just walk around looking like you hate each other, as you do now. She gave them both knowing looks and they both shrugged. So unfortunately, you'll have to act like a couple, starting today. So troublesome. Shikamaru groaned. Maybe this is just a stupid prank. It is rather ironic, considering the conversation I was having with Choji just before I was asked to come here. He began thinking of possibilities in his head. Temari didn't even bother to speak this time. Her expression said it all. This is the worst mission ever. Why does it have to be me? Why couldn't Gaara get married? 'Cause he's the case cage, she thought, answering her own question. Well, what about Kankuro? Oh wait, he has a girlfriend back in Suna, doesn't he? Still, some other kunoichi from Suna could have done this. Maybe I can just refuse this missio. Tsunade-sama, I think they're in shock. Neither of them are moving, and it doesn't look like they're breathing. Shizune's voice cut Shikamaru and Temari from their thoughts. Temari's breathing. I think there might be steam coming out of her ears too, Kankuro said sarcastically. They're both fine. It's just going to take some time to get used to this, however, we don't have much time. Tsunade sighed. Nara Shikamaru. Temari. She yelled so loud that the room shook and the 2 shinobi immediately focused on the angry Hokage. I don't understand what you two have against each other, and honestly I don't care. Whatever it is, you're both going to have to get over it. This is a very serious mission, and if something goes wrong, then I guarantee both our countries will seem very weak to the outside world. If you two don't cooperate, then our countries will be the victims of war. That caught both of their attentions. They froze and their faces went blank. Tsunade smirked grimly. Obviously that's something neither of you want. I appreciate your cooperation. Thank you. Your mission starts now. The Hokage nodded and began walking out of the room with Shizune right on her tail. Shikamaru let out another sigh as he turned towards the door again. He stopped in the doorway and turned to face Temari, who was still frozen in place. What's wrong with her? Temari. She heard Gaara's low voice from behind her and she turned around. Yes, Kazekage-sama? Temari asked sarcastically. He ignored her comment as he stood up. Temari, please cooperate. He was standing in front of her now. We're both really sorry about this, Temari. Kankuro added. Gaara nodded. I would have chosen someone else if it was possible, however, that wasn't the case. You two are overreacting. This is just a mission. I don't care, I'll cooperate and act head over heels as for. Before she could finish, Kankuro was smothering her in a hug. We'll miss you, Ni-chan. What do you mean, you'll miss me? Temari pushed Kankuro away so she could see his face. It's not like I can't come visit Suna, and you can come visit me, right? Gaara and Kankuro looked at each other for a moment, as if they were speaking through their eyes. Then they looked back at Temari. I'm sorry Temari, but unfortunately that's part of the mission, Gaara frowned slightly. You have to live here, with Shikamaru, and you can't visit us, you're still the Casecage's sister after all, if you keep traveling around, you'll be at risk of getting hurt. Temari was speechless. What was there to say? First, they force me to get married to someone I haven't seen in years, she shuddered at that thought. And second, I'm not allowed to see my brothers. You both know I'm capable of taking care of myself, I wouldn't let something happen to myself, I'll even bring my new hubby with me, to be extra careful, she tried to smile, but felt sick at her own words. Gaara shook his head, we both know how capable you are of taking care of yourself, but this is for your own safety. There was no arguing with that, he was speaking as her Casecage, not as her brother. Fine. Goodbye Temari. Kankuro hugged her again, and this time she hugged him back. I'll miss you, she whispered. He let go and forced a smile. See you around. He walked out of the room without saying another word. Gaara was still in front of her though, he didn't say anything, but he hesitantly wrapped his arms around her. Good luck Ni-chan. Temari froze for a moment, but smiled and hugged her younger brother. She didn't say anything because words would be pointless. Gaara rarely showed any sign of affection, so this was enough. They both let go and nodded at each other as a silent way of saying goodbye. Once Gaara was gone, Temari finally decided to turn around and face her soon-to-be husband. He looked as if he hadn't just seen or heard anything that had just happened, even though he definitely had. Temari would have thanked him if she didn't feel obliged to dislike him so much. I guess I'm going to have to get over that, aren't I? She took a deep breath and walked towards the door. Shikamaru just looked at her. Coming, dear, Temari said sarcastically. Shikamaru laughed at that, of course, he stood up straight, darling. Temari smiled a little and walked out of the room, maybe this mission won't be so terrible. Shikamaru followed her out into the hallway, maybe this won't be as troublesome as I thought. They both looked at each other as they walked down the stairs and out of the building. Yeah right, I knew it Shikamaru, I knew you'd find the right one, Choji said delightedly with a mouth full of meat. Shikamaru smirked but didn't say anything, if only, he almost laughed. Today was the fourth day on his mission with Temari, but they weren't spending it together. They had unwillingly tried spending as much time together as possible since their meeting with the Hokage. To Shikamaru's surprise, their first day together wasn't so dreadful. He gave her a tour of Konoha, since she hadn't been there in 6 years, and they reintroduced themselves to each other and caught up on some things they had missed in the past several years. At the end of the day he showed her to his apartment, where she made him sleep on the couch while she slept in his bed. That was just like her, being the troublesome woman that she is. He figured that, arguing with her about it would only make things worse. The second day was much more difficult than the first. Shizune re-informed them that they had to act like a couple, and so they spent most of the day reluctantly holding hands and walking around Konoha like a happy couple. Shikamaru shuddered at the memory. It was a horrible experience, to say the least. All of Shikamaru's friends kept badgering him with questions about her, how long they'd been dating and why he hadn't told any of them before. It was troublesome, especially since they'd never really been dating in the first place. Then on the third day, Shizune approached them again to give them a key to their new home. That caught them both by surprise. Temari was happy that she wouldn't have to sleep in Shikamaru's old, back-breaking bed again. However, Shikamaru wasn't so optimistic. He was content with his apartment. It was small, plain, and easy to manage. A new home just sounded too troublesome. It was part of the mission though, so it had to be done. Shikamaru had felt like Temari was about to break his neck after they spent so much time together. For this reason, they decided to spend today apart. Temari was spending time with some of the kunoichi of Konoha begrudgingly, trying to make friends, while Shikamaru was spending time with his comrades. Yeah, so when's the, this is weird. Kiba scratched his head, wedding? On the inside, Shikamaru cringed, but he managed to make a believable smile that made it seem as if the thought of getting married actually made him happy. In 3 days. Neji smirked. You two were destined to be together, I can tell. A toast. Lee stood up and raised his glass into the air. Kiba smirked and lifted his glass as well, yeah, to the least likely groom in history. Everyone laughed, even Shikamaru couldn't help himself. It was true, and if it weren't for this stupid mission, he'd probably never get married, but he couldn't exactly tell them that. Not if he wanted to keep his cover at least. Cheers, they said as they all hit their glasses together. All of them except Naruto. He hadn't said much since they'd been at the restaurant, which was strange. The ninja usually blabbered on and on about very insignificant things, like ramen. After things quieted down a bit, Naruto finally spoke up. Am I the only one who thinks this is weird? Shikamaru stiffened. Out of everyone, Naruto's the one who gets suspicious? Of course it's weird, Naruto. Like I said before, who'd have thought Shikamaru, out of all of us, would be the first to get married? Shut up, Kiba. Shikamaru glared across the table at him. As the best man, Choji smiled proudly. I'm happy for Shikamaru. Naruto rolled his eyes. That's not what I meant. Everyone looked at him with curious expressions. What I mean is, doesn't anyone else think it's weird how fast this is all happening? Because the last time I remember Temari actually being in Konoha was 5 years ago. She suddenly comes back a few days ago and now her and Shikamaru are getting married. I don't know, it seems pretty strange to me. Now that you mention it, it does seem a little strange. Neji nodded, but I think that it is destiny that has brought Temari back to Konoha. I think Shikamaru and Temari make a nice couple. I don't think it's strange at all. Choji commented in Shikamaru's defense. I still think it's weird. Naruto mumbled. There's no way they could have decided to get married in only a few days. We didn't, Shikamaru stated. Naruto's pretty smart. Too bad for him, Temari, and I already prepared for something like this. We've been using special scrolls that turn whatever you write into animals, like the ones Sai uses, to communicate with each other for the past 6 years. So I'd write a message, use a seal to change it into an animal, then the animal would find its way to Temari who had the matching scroll, or vice versa. Sometimes on my way back home from missions that were far away I'd even stop by Suna for a day to see her. He smiled adoringly to make it seem more convincing. We decided to get married a few months ago and she came here a week before the wedding to adjust to her new home. Shikamaru had a sick taste in his mouth. He hated lying to them. These were his comrades, his friends, and here he was lying as if it was nothing, right to their faces. It has to be done. For the mission, for Konoha, for peace. Naruto stared at him blankly. Oh, I guess that makes sense. See, Naruto, I told you it wasn't weird. Choji laughed. Lee stood up again. Shikamaru, you have inspired me to propose to my lovely Eliska-chan. If I can't be the first out of all of us to get married, then I shall be the second. Kiba gave him a devious smirk. Not if I ask my Hinata-chan to marry me first. Is that a challenge, Kiba? Lee stood up and without giving Kiba another chance to speak shouted, I accept. Now I must go find a ring suitable for my Eliska-chan. He was gone in flash without saying another word. They all stared incredulously at the spot where Lee stood only seconds before. Kiba shrugged. I wonder when he'll learn to take a joke. Neji shook his head. I doubt he will ever learn. Great, that means another wedding to go to. Kiba sighed. Can we stop talking about weddings, please? Shikamaru whined, already tired of the subject. Everyone looked at him for a moment, and then they started laughing. Shikamaru laughed as well at the irony of it all. If only you knew. I want to go home. Temari wanted to scream. This is torture. She was getting tired of this act. The smiling, the laughing, having fun, answering all these stupid Kunoichi's stupid questions. Most of all, she was tired of acting like she actually wanted to marry that stupid Shikamaru. Why couldn't Tsunade have given us more than a week to get married? 2 weeks would have even been okay, but 1 week? Temari felt sudden discord as she thought about the past few days. Horrible was the only word that came to her mind. On the first day, Shikamaru acted responsible and decided that he should take her on a tour of Konoha, cause so much had changed in the past 6 years, while they caught up on things. She thought it was pointless and he was just wasting his time, making things more troublesome for himself, as he would probably say. And the worst part of that day was when he took her back to his apartment. There was only 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. The living room was hardly big enough for the couch, and Temari refused to believe there was a kitchen in there somewhere. Of course, neither of them was willing to share the bed and Temari wasn't going to be the one to sleep on the couch. So instead, she called dibs on the bed, which really wasn't much of a bed at all. The next day, Shizune told them that they had to act like a happy couple. Temari was about to gag. After Shizune left, Temari told Shikamaru that she refused to do anything more than hold hands and look cute. He didn't argue with that, thankfully. That, unfortunately, was enough to get people curious. All day random shinobi and kunoichi would come up to them and ask them dumb questions about their relationship. It was infuriating. The third day was probably the worst. By that point Temari wanted to break Shikamaru's neck. So, after they got acquainted to their new home that Tsunade so kindly offered them, they decided to spend the next day apart. It's all because of those stupid rumors. Temari groaned inwardly. What the hell made people think the alliance between Suna and Konoha was crumbling? People are so stupid. Temari-san? A quiet voice interrupted Temari's thoughts. Temari turned her head towards the shy shinobi with lavender eyes. Hinata pointed at the three-angled floor-length mirrors a few feet away from Temari. Look. Temari's expression turned into confusion, but she did as Hinata told her and looked at the mirrors. When she did, to her own surprise, she blushed. In the mirror there were 5 kunoichi. Hinata, Tenten, Sakura, Ino, but, who's the girl in the dress? She asked. The other 4 girls started to giggle. What are you talking about, Temari? In the mirror, Temari saw Tenten lean on the shoulder of the girl in the dress. Sakura smiled. That's you, Temari. Temari's eyes grew wide and she blushed even more, which caused the others to giggle some more. What have they done to me? She asked herself. Not that it was a bad thing, and even she had to admit, if the girl in the mirror was her, she looked gorgeous. She studied the mirror for a few minutes longer. She was wearing a floor-length white dress that she never would have pictured herself wearing. The most shocking thing though, which was probably why she didn't feel like herself, was that her hair was down, instead of in its usual 4 pigtails. She even had makeup on. So this is what they've been doing to me. Temari smiled and twirled around. So did the girl in the mirror. It really is me. You look beautiful, Temari-san. Hinata smiled at her. Ino laughed. Well, of course she does. I did her hair and makeup, she bragged. Sakura hit Ino playfully. I did her hair. You did her makeup. Oh, right. Ino smiled. And Hinata and I worked on the dress, Tenten added. Temari looked at them all in astonishment. You made this dress? She asked Hinata and Tenten. Tenten shook her head. We already bought a dress. Hinata nodded. We just did some work on it, and you really do look stunning, Sakura complimented. I can't wait to see the look on Shikamaru's face when he sees you. Ino clapped her hands in amusement. Temari felt sick. Suddenly it was all so real. I'm getting married in 3 days. This was the part she hated most, acting like she was happy about this whole thing, like this was what she really wanted, if only they knew. She put on her best fake smile, which was now getting to be pretty convincing. Well, thanks to you girls, I'm sure he won't be disappointed. They all started giggling again. This time Temari even tried her best to giggle. Kill me. After they finished with Temari's dress and makeup, the kunoichi made Temari come with them so she could choose the bridesmaids' dresses. Temari had tried telling them she was tired and just wanted to go home and relax, but they wouldn't listen. Why do they keep putting me through this torture? If it weren't for the fact that they had been so kind about Temari's dress and makeup, she would have picked some hideous bridesmaids' dresses. She laughed at the idea, feathers and bows everywhere. Ha ha ha. Unfortunately, they had been kind about her dress and makeup, so she had to return the favor. It took a few hours, but eventually Temari found the perfect dress for each of them. She didn't want it to be like a normal wedding where all the bridesmaids wore the same dress. Temari always thought that was incredibly boring. She wanted variety. For Sakura, Temari chose a light pink, sleeveless dress that matched her hair perfectly. It went past her knees a few inches and had a thick, pink, silk band that went across her midsection. Hinata's dress was of course, lavender. It was the same length as Sakura's, it had short, flowy sleeves, and there was a thin, lavender, silk band that went across her midsection. Tenten's dress was a red, floor-length dress. It had a V neckline because of the thick straps and an open back. Temari picked the most different dress for Ino, as her maid of honor. She didn't know what possessed her to give the title to her. The only reason she could think of was that she had been Shikamaru's teammate for several years. Her dress was a light shade of purple, not as light as Hinata's though, it was strapless and floor-length. It came with a purple shawl that wrapped around Ino's arms. When all 4 bridesmaids stood next to each other, Temari couldn't help but smile. Dress shopping was definitely not her thing, but she had to admit to herself that she made some good choices. Hinata, Sakura, Tenten and Ino seemed to be happy with their dresses, so they bought them and finally let Temari go home. Shikamaru fumbled in his pockets to find his house key. He unsteadily unlocked the door and made his way to the couch where he immediately collapsed. He groaned. I shouldn't have let them convince me to drink so much sake. He didn't know what had come over him. Usually he'd never let himself get drunk. Stress, he thought. That troublesome woman. Suddenly, There was an angel in front of him, distracting him from his thoughts. An angel in khakis and a plain white t-shirt. He smiled. Maybe I should get drunk more often, her long golden hair reminded him of. Ha, the angel scoffed. Someone had a little too much to drink, huh? Shikamaru slowly sat up. Or not. Some angel, he muttered. Temari turned around and shot Shikamaru an incredulous look. What did you say? She looks so beautiful. He laughed after he spoke. I said that out loud. He laughed some more. And you're an idiot. Temari glared. She was pretty sure she was blushing though. She hadn't remembered until now that her hair was still down and she was still wearing the makeup that Ino put on her. That can't possibly be Temari. I mean it, he struggled to say. Temari continued glaring at him as she took of her shoe and threw it at his head. So do I. Now shut your drunken mouth and go to sleep. Shikamaru smiled, as if her shoe hadn't even hit him, and lay back down on the couch. Yes dear, he hiccuped. Temari rolled her eyes but couldn't help but laugh. This was probably the only time she'd ever see Shikamaru drunk, and it was actually amusing. She changed into pajamas and lay down in her bed, still laughing a little, not because of Shikamaru, but because of the mission. I'm getting married to an idiot. Temari woke up that morning to the delicious scent of something cooking. She just wasn't sure what. Whatever it was, it made her realize that she had gone to bed without dinner and she was absolutely starving. She drowsily got out of bed and followed the scent out of her room and into the kitchen where she was incredibly surprised to find Shikamaru cooking. He didn't seem to notice her. His back was turned the other way, towards the stove, and he continued cooking. Temari smirked and sat down on one of the wooden chairs at their kitchen table. She turned it around to face Shikamaru and watched him. What she didn't know was that Shikamaru knew she was there, he just chose to ignore her. After a while of silence, Temari grew frustrated. You're ignoring me now. She wasn't asking him, it was more of a statement. Shikamaru didn't say anything, he kept his back turned to her and continued to cook. Troublesome woman. Temari glowered at him. Oh, that's fair, you're the one who gets drunk and harasses me, and I'm the one who has to pay for it. I can't believe you're such an asshole. She muttered some more profanities under her breath. Shikamaru pretended he didn't hear her as he put the finished meals on 2 plates and walked over to the table, placing one dish in front of Temari and the other in front of the seat across from her where he sat down. I'm not ignoring you. Temari was still glaring as she opened her mouth to speak, but Shikamaru cut her off, and as I recall, you threw your shoe at my head. He rubbed the side of his head and pouted. You deserved it, she said, a little too loudly. His eyes grew wide with confusion before he looked down at his breakfast and continued eating. I thought girls were supposed to like being called pretty, though I supposed you aren't exactly a normal girl. Temari clenched the side of her chair with both hands to refrain from grabbing her knife and throwing at his head. Apparently, he noticed because the next words out of his mouth were, would you calm down? I meant it in a good way. He flashed a kind smile, sort of. It was more of a twitch of his lips, smiling took way too much effort. That didn't really help too much, but Temari relaxed a little bit and crossed her arms over her chest. She held her glare though. You said beautiful. Shikamaru looked up at her and seemed to be studying her for a moment. I suppose. His lips formed a thin line and he seemed to be studying her again, but not in a way that would make me want to kiss you or anything. Temari's jaw almost dropped when he said that. Was it just her or did he seem to linger on the word kiss? Kiss, kiss, she nearly yelled. Holy shit. He smirked. Finally she gets it. I was starting to think she didn't remember. We have to kiss at the wedding. She yelled as she stood up and groaned, forcing her chair back a couple feet, and then she started pacing. Oh no, I have to. Kiss, blah. She made a disgusted face as if just thinking about it made her want to gag. You're kidding me. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. You're impossible. Temari stopped pacing and looked incredulously at Shikamaru. Excuse me? He scoffed. You don't remember that day all those years ago? The last day you were in Konoha? When I escorted you home, and you. He paused and looked away from her. I what? She raised an eyebrow. Just spit it out, moron. He rolled his eyes. Better now than never. You kissed me. How can you not remember that? Shikamaru looked up after she didn't respond for a minute, thinking maybe he shouldn't have said anything. To his surprise, she was gaping at him, and as soon as his eyes met hers, she broke into hysterical laughter. Why the hell would I ever kiss you? She managed to say before she started to laugh again. If it weren't for this mission, She didn't finish the sentence. She had to hold on to the table for support to keep from falling on the floor because she was laughing so hard. She really doesn't remember. Never mind. Shikamaru stood up and put his dishes in the sink. I guess you just don't remember, he said as he walked out of the room. I'm going out to meet Choji and Ino, he called. But sweetheart, I thought we were going to meet your parents, she called sarcastically, still laughing as she spoke. Shikamaru paused in the doorway. My father is a lot like me. I doubt you'd like him much, and my mother, she's a hag. He turned to look at her and smirked. You remind me of her. Temari grabbed a knife and threw it into the wall where Shikamaru's head had been, but it was too late, he was already gone. Why did I have to get stuck on this mission with him? Of all shinobi. She sat down in the chair again and leaned her head in her hands. She was more frustrated and upset than she had been in all her life. Well, not all her life. But this was definitely one of the worst. Why was it so horrible? Most likely because she did remember. She remembered perfectly, that day when she kissed Shikamaru. That's why she hated him so much. She didn't want to remember that day, because she didn't just kiss the boy for the sake of kissing him. No, she had kissed him because she had a crush on him. When she found out she had been paired with him on this mission, she decided right away that she would hate him. Getting to know him, understand him, or maybe even starting to like him were not options. If I hadn't been so dumb, Temari thought as she threw her plate of still untouched food to the floor. If I just knew how to control my stupid emotions. She knew that acting as if Shikamaru was just crazy wouldn't last long. He was smarter than that. It scared her. Because if she had to admit to remembering, she'd have to admit why she did it, and she was afraid that might bring back some of those feelings that she locked up so many years ago, the feelings that might still be lurking deep within her heart. This is ridiculous. I'm incapable of having feelings like that for anyone. She walked across the room and started to clean up the dish she threw. You're going insane, Temari. She laughed at herself for that one, then took a deep breath. I'm being forced to marry Nara Shikamaru in 2 days. It's going to be the worst experience of my life. I'm going to hate every moment of it and I'm going to be completely miserable. I won't be able to see Gaara and Kankuro for God know how long. She felt an emptiness in her heart then. That was going to be the hardest part of the mission. Good. She grimaced. This is how it should be. This is how I'm supposed to feel. After Shikamaru left the house, he went straight to the training grounds. He hadn't had the chance to throw some kunai around lately, and it was a good way to resolve this anger that he never really felt before. He never intended to go see Ino and Choji, but he knew that demonic woman would have never let him out of the house without a good excuse. She seemed to like having him around just so she could make him as miserable as she was. I can't stand her. Shikamaru threw a kunai at a tree and froze. Kakashi was leaning against the tree where Shikamaru's kunai hit. Can't stand who? The gray-haired copy ninja asked as he pulled the kunai out of the tree and started to walk towards Shikamaru. Ino. Shikamaru thought quickly. She's so controlling. She wants to be in charge of my whole wedding. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and hoped it was a convincing lie, even though it wasn't necessarily a lie. What are you doing here? I came here to train with Naruto, but it looks like he's the one who was late for once. Kakashi shrugged and handed the kunai to Shikamaru. You know, Shikamaru, it's okay to get mad at the ones you love. Aiko and I get in fights sometimes too. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow. What does that have to do with anything? I need to learn how to be a better liar. I'm just letting you know, it's not abnormal to get in fights with your significant other. He shrugged again, especially in your situation. Shikamaru flinched. What do you mean, my situation? Kakashi raised an eyebrow at him. You're getting married in 2 days. You're both under a lot of pressure. It's perfectly understandable if you get angry at each other. Oh. Shikamaru sighed. I guess so, and I'm even more nervous because we're having dinner with my parents tonight. There you go. The copy ninja's face formed what Shikamaru guessed was a smile. He couldn't really tell because of the mask. It's nothing to hide. You know, sometimes fights in a relationship can be healthy. Thank you, Kakashi. Shikamaru nodded. Could you do me a favor? Kakashi tilted his head. Could you not tell Naruto about this? He already thinks there's something weird about Temari, and I don't want him questioning our relationship. Shikamaru put his head down, acting as though his feelings were hurt. Kakashi just nodded. Don't worry about it. Shikamaru half smiled. Thanks again, Kakashi. The copy ninja nodded in response as Shikamaru turned and started to leave. Maybe I'm not such a bad liar. Shikamaru. A familiar voice called. What are you doing here? Shikamaru looked up to see the last person he wanted to see right now. Oh, Naruto. He gave his comrade a half-hearted smile. I was just practicing, but Kakashi told me he was waiting for you. He grinned. I thought he was usually the one who was late. Naruto rolled his eyes and it didn't go unnoticed to Shikamaru that he blushed a little. That's none of your business. I'm sure. Shikamaru laughed and continued on his way. When he made it back to town, he sighed realizing he had to go back home to his adoring bride-to-be. Why can't Tsunade put me on a really long, troublesome mission? He laughed aloud at his thought. Because I'm already on one. Temari was sleeping on the couch when Shikamaru finally got home. Maybe I should just let her sleep, she can meet my parents some other time, he smirked. Sounds like a plan. He decided to go take a shower to relax himself. It worked too. He felt much better once he got out of the shower. That is, until he opened the bathroom door. Temari was standing there, waiting impatiently, and of course, the only thing Shikamaru was wearing was a towel. His hair wasn't even in its usual ponytail. She eyed him up, wearing a disgusted look on her face. She scoffed, disgusting. Put some clothes on. You're taking me to meet your parents and we're leaving in 5 minutes. Shikamaru saluted her like a soldier. Yes sir. Temari scowled at him in response. He rolled his eyes and went to get dressed. He just managed to get himself into a decent mood. There was no way he was going to let her ruin it, again. Temari glared at his retreating figure. He is going to pay for that later. She grinned, knowing exactly how she would get back at him. Ready? Shikamaru asked, his hand on the doorknob. Temari blinked a few times. That was fast. She nodded and pushed the door open before he could open it for her. Let's go. Temari. Shikamaru's mother yelped with excitement and flung her arms around her soon-to-be daughter-in-law. It is so great to finally meet you. She smiled then looked at her son and smirked. I was beginning to think he was making you up. She's kidding. Shikamaru's father came into the room and stood next to his wife. No I'm not, his mother said sternly, then looked at Temari and smirked again. She's standing right in front of me and I still don't believe it. Temari laughed. I like this woman. Well, I am real. She smiled sweetly. It's very nice to finally meet both of you. The pleasure is ours. Shikaku said, have a seat, dinner will be ready shortly. He nodded at the table and walked towards the kitchen. Thank you. Temari smiled sweetly again, then she looked at Shikamaru. Honey, you lied to me. She said in a happy tone that was just a little too loud. You and your father are nothing alike. He is much more charming than you. Shikaku turned around and gave Shikamaru a strange look before he headed into the kitchen. Shikamaru's eyes grew slightly wide. He knew where she was going with this. You don't know him as well as I do. He whispered and sat down. I will soon enough, she said as she sat down next to Shikamaru and across from his mother. She leaned in to whisper in his ear, and your mother is definitely not a hag, she is so sweet. Her whisper was a little too loud however. His mother's eyes grew slightly wide with surprise. What did you say? Shit. Why does my mother have to have the ears of a hawk? She said she thinks you're sweet and she's glad to be here. Shikamaru tried to cover up for Temari's big, stupid, obnoxious mouth. Well, his mother smiled at him half-heartedly before she looked at Temari. Thank you. I'm so happy you're here too. Here, Shikaku came in and placed plates of baked fish and curry rice in front of each of them. Hope you like it. For about 20 minutes Temari would continuously stare at Shikamaru's father, and would ask him questions about his life. What's your favorite food? Favorite color? Favorite fighting style? How old were you when you became a Junin? Etc. Finally, Shikamaru asked her what she was doing. Comparing you to your father, she said as if it were completely obvious. I really don't understand why you said you're like him. He's much more appealing than you. She whispered, but winked flirtatiously at his father. It didn't escape his notice. He paused for a moment, somehow managing to keep his mouth shut before he continued eating his meal. Shikamaru almost slammed his head against the table at that point. This is going to be a long night. The rest of the night spent with Shikamaru's parents went pretty much the same as dinner. Temari continuously made comments that made Shikamaru look bad, became great friends with his mother, and occasionally flirting with his father. Overall, it was the worst night of Shikamaru's life. I don't understand why you're being such a baby, Temari had said once they arrived back at their house. They both really seemed to like me. She smirked proudly. HN, was Shikamaru's only response before he lay down on his couch and covered his head with a pillow. Temari laughed, real mature. So I take it you're not talking to me. After he didn't respond she shrugged and headed for her room. All right. I can deal with that. She smirked once more before closing the door and going to bed. I'll see you at the wedding. At the time, Shikamaru hadn't thought she meant it quite so literally. However, when he woke up the next day, he'd slept in late so it was already afternoon. He found a note on the table. Out. It was obviously Temari's handwriting, and even though it was only one word, it surprised Shikamaru that she even bothered to write a note for him. It bothered him that he had no idea what she was doing. Where was she? Who was she with? When would she be back? Why is this bothering me so much? Shikamaru couldn't figure out an answer to any of these questions, especially the last one. Whatever, he thought, trying not to care. If Temari was going to spend her last day of freedom out and about, then he was going to spend his day doing whatever he wanted, which, of course, didn't consist of much. The lazy shinobi spent his day at home, either napping or playing shugi with himself. He was beating himself 6-4, when he looked out the window and realized how late it had gotten. I guess I really won't see her till the wedding. Shikamaru shrugged and yawned, deciding to give up with shugi. He'd most definitely settle this match some other time, and go to bed. When he woke up in the morning, there was still no sign of Temari. Now, here he was, at their wedding, still unsure whether she would actually show up or not. No one is panicking, the usually very level-headed man thought, trying to reassure himself. If she weren't here by now, someone definitely would have noticed, at least that's what he hoped. No, he knew. He knew because he was standing there at the altar, in a much too stuffy black tux. His usually tied-up hair was down and all of his friends and family were sitting before him. They were waiting, just as he was, for the troublesome woman to come through the double doors, march up an aisle and marry him. The woman might be cruel, but she would never let her country down. Or her brothers, who were sitting in the front row, smiling, even Gara. That was an odd sight to see, not a bad one, but odd nonetheless. The music started, and as if it were a timed reaction, Shikamaru's heart stopped. From that point on everything went in slow motion. Why is he looking at me like that? A smile crept upon Temari's face as she slowly marched up the aisle to her soon-to-be husband. He looks like such an idiot. She almost laughed. I wonder if I look as stupid as he does. It took all of her focus not to shudder at the thought of her bridesmaids helping her get dressed and put on her makeup. It was even more tortuous than the first time. They took her hair out of its pigtails and then they curled it. She didn't even want to look at the makeup. She knew Ino and Sakura well enough to know that they wouldn't let her go to her wedding wearing bad makeup. After what had seemed like an endless amount of time, Temari finally made it to the end of the aisle and stood next to her groom. This is it. The blonde bride thought, fighting with all her might not to run away. They both turned to face each other, and they immediately were thinking the same exact thing. Wow. It must have shown on their faces, because they could hear giggling and whispers of adoration from the crowd in front of them. So adorable, one said. It's like they're seeing each other for the first time, another giggled. Why don't you ever look at me like that? A woman asked in an angry whisper. Shikamaru couldn't believe what he was seeing. Is this really the woman I've been spending the past week with? Is this really that idiot I've been forced to live with? Temari was asking herself. To Shikamaru it was like seeing that angel, from the night he got drunk, again. He didn't want to believe it, but he knew it was true. This fair-haired goddess standing in front of him was most definitely the hag. She's beautiful. At this point Temari was shocked that she hadn't dropped her composure and let her mouth hang open. She couldn't believe it, this couldn't be Shikamaru. This man, this tall, nonchalant man with perfect hair. She hated to admit it, but it was him. He's hot. Oh my god. The bride smiled, a real one this time, realizing he was staring at her the same way she was probably staring at him. I'm being forced to marry a really, really hot guy. Again their thoughts were the same. Maybe this mission won't be so bad after all? It felt like they had been staring at each other for forever, but in reality it had only been about a minute. Ahem. The priest cleared his throat and smiled. Let's begin. The priest spoke for a little while, then each of them said their vows, which were short and simple, but to the point. They put their rings on each other's fingers, and then the fateful lines came. I now pronounce you, husband and wife. You may kiss the bride. Temari blushed and Shikamaru smirked, covering his embarrassment and reluctance. They had never kissed. Well, not recently, or at all according to Temari, and only held hands occasionally when out in public. That was all though, and now they had to kiss, and make it convincing. They both leaned in slightly and smiled as they gave each other a slight nod. Slowly, they closed the gap between them. Neither of them had known what to expect when they kissed. Disgust? Nausea? Or maybe just nothing? Well, one thing is for sure, neither of them had been expecting this. Before their lips had even met, it had been as if there was an extremely strong magnetic pull between them. So strong, it seemed as though they may never be able to separate. How could they? Their lips fit together perfectly, and they could feel each other smiling. It was like finally finding that missing piece to your favorite puzzle. Behind Temari, Ino giggled quietly, and behind Shikamaru, Choji coughed into his sleeve. They finally remembered their surroundings and, almost reluctantly, separated. For a moment, they just stared at each other, both still in a daze from the intimate kiss they just shared. Together they turned to face the crowd. Most of them were smiling in admiration, some were giggling, just as Ino had. The people in the front row were really the only ones who caught their attention though. Shizune was one of the people giggling, but she was trying to hide that. Next to her, Tsunade was smiling deviously. On Tsunade's right was Gaara, who had completely dropped his smile and regained his perfect composure, his face revealing nothing. Kankuro, who was on the end, was shaking his head slightly. Was he amused or disappointed? Neither of them could answer that question. Still smiling, though not as wholeheartedly as before, the newly married couple made their way out of the church. The best man and the maid of honor followed. Once outside, Choji pulled 2 scarves out of the inside pocket of his jacket. Ino bounced up and down with excitement as she took one of the scarves out of Choji's hand. "Turn around. This is my favorite part," she demanded the couple. Shikamaru sighed. He knew this was coming, and he wasn't excited at all. Traditionally, in Konoha weddings, the location of the reception was a surprise to the bride and groom. Choji laughed as he put the scarf over Shikamaru's eyes. "Don't worry, Shikamaru," he whispered. "Just remember you'll get to do this to me someday." He laughed again, and this time Shikamaru laughed with him. "Aren't you excited, Temari?" Ino was pestering the other blonde as she tied the scarf. "You're both going to love the reception. The location is perfect and everyone helped to decorate it." "I'm thrilled." Temari shuddered slightly at her lie and hoped Ino wouldn't notice. How long had it taken them to get here? It felt like eternity, but eventually they arrived at the reception area. Ino giggled with excitement as she untied Temari's scarf. Choji laughed as well. Shikamaru was filled with relief when the blindfold was off. As a shinobi, not being able to see made him paranoid. It took a moment for his eyes to adjust though, and once they did, he smirked. "The training grounds?" Temari was confused. When Shikamaru had given her a tour of Konoha, he had shown her the training grounds. This place was definitely not the training grounds. The perimeter of the circular field was lined with lanterns. In the middle, there was a large tent, with tables around the edges. One longer table was filled with food. In the center of the tent, there was a large flat area. Temari didn't realize what that was until she heard faint music playing from the other side of the tent. No, this elegant place was definitely not the torn-up training grounds that Shikamaru had shown her on her first day. Choji nodded to Shikamaru and smiled at Temari, then quickly made his way to the food table. Ino laughed. "Yup, this is the training grounds, lies." Temari thought bitterly. "Choji and I figured you would like this place the best for the reception. He thought it would be more comfortable for you, Shikamaru." She shrugged, "And I thought Temari would enjoy the outdoors for a change. I swear you two never leave your house." She raised an eyebrow suggestively at them both. Shikamaru hit her and she laughed. "I'm gonna go make sure Choji doesn't eat all the food now. Have fun." She winked at them and skipped after Choji. They were alone now. Of course, their friends and family were there, dancing, eating and just having a good time. None of them would notice the couple until they actually entered the tent though, probably. Shikamaru decided against his better judgment that someone would notice them, and decided to use this brief time to talk about the wedding. "You know, I didn't expect." His voice trailed off. "What am I supposed to say? I didn't expect to enjoy kissing you." He shook his head. That may be something she would say to him, but he'd never risk insulting a woman like that. Especially not this woman. Temari's hands balled up into fists, but it wasn't until that moment that either of them had realized they were still holding hands. She shuddered. To him it probably seemed like she was squeezing his hand. "Let's just forget it. For tonight we'll act like the happy couple we were at the wedding, and then when we get home things will go back to the way they have been." "What about the honeymoon?" A new voice joined their conversation. They both froze, and slowly turned to see who it was. Tsunade. They relaxed. "Same thing, different location." Temari answered. "I don't think that's going to be quite as easy as you make it sound, Mrs. Nara," the Hokage said with an all-too-innocent grin. Shikamaru laughed nervously. Temari shuddered. "Probably for the millionth time today. What makes you say that?" The Hokage snorted. "Let's just say, I was surprised that Kiss didn't turn into a scene from one of Kakashi's books." She laughed and walked away to join everyone else under the tent. Temari was more confused than ever. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked angrily when she saw Shikamaru's shocked face. Shikamaru shuddered and his face returned to normal. Just, forget it. Explain later. He shuddered again. Let's just forget it and act like the happy couple we were at the wedding. He laughed another nervous laugh, just, not the kissing part. You are so weird, Temari exclaimed after listening to his nervous rant. He laughed again, a real one. You agreed to marry me. Her jaw dropped and after a minute she shook her head. That was not funny. I know. Shikamaru smiled at her. Come on. Let's get this troublesome reception over with. I'd really rather not. Can't I? We just leave? The blonde pouted. The sight of the bitter woman pouting made Shikamaru laugh. Unfortunately not. Here's something to look forward though. When we eat the cake, you get to shove a piece in my face, he exclaimed sarcastically. Well then, what are we waiting for? She suddenly perked up. Come on honey, let's go, she joked, pulling him towards the tent. He sighed and rolled his eyes at her. Whatever you say, dearest. I really hate to admit it, but this really isn't so horrible. Temari said quietly as she and Shikamaru danced their first dance together as a married couple. Oh, Shikamaru was surprised. He thought that she'd be irritated and wouldn't speak to him until they got home. The last thing he expected was for her to say something like that, and now? When they were so close? He was honestly shocked. That was nice of you to say. He smiled. I guess I'll have to agree with you on that. It's definitely not as troublesome as I thought it would be. His wife giggled. You think everything is troublesome. And I mean, everyone is so nice and happy, it's hard not to have a good time. And, she sighed, dancing with you isn't so bad either. Her husband's eyebrows shot up in surprise. Wow. Thanks. I like dancing with you too. She snorted, a quiet snort though. Don't push it, babe. She twitched at the word. I never said I like dancing with you. It's just not that bad, as in, you don't smell bad and you haven't stepped on my feet yet. He laughed. Not real good at giving compliments are you? HMPH, was her only response. Compliments go more like this. He used his hand to lift her chin, so she was looking at his eyes. You look beautiful, Shikamaru said sincerely. Temari shuddered once again, not necessarily in a bad way this time. When she didn't respond, Shikamaru smirked. Your turn, he whispered. The notion sent shivers down her spine. Oh God, I'm losing it. I'm not stupid. She tore her eyes from his. I know how to compliment someone when I want to. That comment was intended to make him angry, but it didn't work. Instead of getting angry, Shikamaru just shrugged. Whatever you say. He just kept smiling, which made Temari want to punch him. I did mean it though. Huh? That caught her by surprise. What? The male shinobi laughed. I really do think you look beautiful. That caused her to blush. I hate him. Thanks. Quickly changing the subject she added. Now, when do I get to shove cake in your face? Their song ended just before he was about to speak. Oh. He looked around. Ino was standing by the huge wedding cake, waving them over. I guess, now? Finally, Temari squeezed his hand, a little too hard, and rushed them over to the cake table. I wonder if she realizes I get to shove cake in her face too? Shikamaru laughed aloud and Temari rolled her eyes at him. Shikamaru picked up the knife when they reached the table. He scrutinized the 5-layered cake. Where do I start? He truly didn't know. Ino must have noticed his dilemma, because she elbowed him gently and pointed to a spot on the bottom. He smiled and mouthed, thank you. He cut a piece for his wife and handed it to her. She looked so eager. Then, he cut a piece for himself. He turned to face Temari. Ready? Temari didn't even respond. She just shoved the cake at his face with more force than necessary. Temari started to giggle and Shikamaru laughed. He'd been expecting worse. Then, without any warning, he shoved his own piece of cake in Temari's face, using little strength. He didn't want to be killed later. Apparently, Temari hadn't been expecting cake on her face. Once she wiped the cake and icing away, her face was so wide with surprise that everyone started laughing. Everyone but Shikamaru. He saw what was coming. She was going to punch him. He could see it in her eyes. She looked so vicious. He could see in his peripheral vision that her hands were turning into fists. After realizing there was only one way out of getting hit, he did the most courageous thing he had ever done in all his years as a shinobi. He placed his hands on both sides of her face and brought his lips to hers. She didn't like that. At first she tried grabbing his hands and pulling them off her face, but he responded by weaving his fingers through hers. She didn't like that either. She squeezed his hands so tight that she was digging into his skin with her fingernails. Shikamaru waited until her grip loosened before he pulled away. Temari's anger hadn't been obvious to everyone else, because they were all smiling. You two make a good couple. Shoji whispered and patted Temari's back. Temari blushed. Tsunade somehow caught Shikamaru's attention. She was grinning, and when Shikamaru looked at her, she nodded towards the corner table of the tent, where Kakashi was reading one of his books. Shikamaru cleared his throat. Well, I think I've had enough cake, he joked, licking his lips. Everyone laughed. Temari elbowed him. It hurt. After that, Shikamaru handed the cake knife to Ino, and he and Temari sat down at the table farthest from Kakashi. Temari took this opportunity to kick Shikamaru under the table. Shikamaru kept his face as normal as possible until she was finished. He'd definitely have some bruises. I'm sorry about that, he whispered, noticing other people were beginning to sit down close to them, but I couldn't have you punching me in front of everyone. I wasn't going to punch you, Temari said in a loud whisper. Shikamaru raised an eyebrow at her. Okay, fine. I was. But you didn't have to. You're so troublesome, he interrupted. You know that nothing else would have gotten your attention. There was nothing she could say to that. He was probably right. Anyway, it was over, done with. She could forget the whole thing ever happened. Once everyone was seated around them, Shoji and Ino stood in the center of the tent. Shoji had his arm around Ino's shoulder and she had her arm around his waist. Next to them were Shikamaru's parents, and on their other side were Gaara and Kankuro. Shikamaru smiled. It's almost over, and we get to leave soon. What? Temari looked at him. How do you know? They're going to make speeches, and then we get to leave. That's how it always is. He rolled his eyes as if it were obvious. Shikamaru's parents only made very short speeches, welcoming Temari to the family, all the classic corny stuff parents usually say at weddings. Gaara didn't say anything, he just nodded and smiled at Shikamaru, and Kankuro just said that it was a pleasure to have another brother. Ino, on the other hand, had plenty to say. Mostly she said insignificant things, about being friends with Shikamaru for so long that he felt like a brother to her. Then, she went on to say, how even though she'd only known Temari for about a week, she felt like they would be the best of friends. She also said that if Shikamaru ever gave Temari a hard time, she would be there in a heartbeat to kick his ass. Shikamaru shrunk down in his seat and everyone laughed, including his parents. Shoji's speech was the shortest, but it was Shikamaru's favorite. It meant a lot to him. Somewhere along the road of becoming a shinobi, Shikamaru became my brother, he started. All I've ever wanted for him is happiness, and I can see how happy he is with you, Temari. It has been my pleasure to get to know you, Nisan. We all welcome you. Everyone clapped when Shoji and the others finished their speeches. Then, Shikamaru grabbed Temari's hand, and they stood up. As they were leaving, they thanked everyone for coming to the wedding, hugged their families, and said their goodbyes. Shikamaru helped Temari into the carriage that would take them to the location of their honeymoon, which was also going to be a surprise for both of them. They waved out the sides to the fading crowd of people, and once they were over the horizon, they dropped their facades. Shikamaru leaned against the side of the carriage, facing his wife, and Temari leaned against the other, facing her husband. Before they knew it, they both started laughing. The hardest part was over. Or so they thought. Excuse me, yes sir, Mr. and Nara. Shikamaru let out a drowsy groan as his eyes fluttered open and he came face to face with the small coachman. Is there a problem? He asked, annoyed that this man woke him. I'm terribly sorry for waking you, sir. The man looked away from Shikamaru's stare. But we have arrived. Shikamaru suddenly remembered his situation. Married. He sighed, how troublesome. Right. He nodded at the nervous man. Where exactly are we? The coachman looked up, looking a little more confident now that Shikamaru didn't sound so annoyed. Sorry, sir. I forgot this was a surprise. He stepped back from the carriage door and gestured for Shikamaru to step outside. If you step outside the carriage, you can see for yourself. The man said with the slightest bit of confidence in his tone, in spite of the stutter. Shikamaru used his advanced shinobi skills to make his way around the sleeping beast that was now his wife. He managed to make his way out of the carriage without disturbing the troublesome woman once. Amazed by the fact that he had made it out of the carriage alive, Shikamaru was caught off guard when he looked at his surroundings. Wherever they were, it was stunning. In front of him was a 20-story hotel in an arc shape. In the center of the arc was the most colorful, elaborate garden Shikamaru had ever seen in his life. There was a sign in the middle of the garden that said, "Welcome to Hamashin." With his advanced shinobi senses, Shikamaru could hear the ocean on the other side of the hotel. He closed his eyes and inhaled the salty ocean air, enjoying the brief moment of peace, for it would probably be his last. Would you like tea to go to your room and now, sir? Shikamaru had almost completely forgotten that the coachman was there. Oh, yes, definitely. The coachman pointed inside of the carriage. Should we wake her? No. Shikamaru almost yelled. When he realized that that was not a good reaction to the question, he continued. She gets very grumpy when you wake her from her naps. I'll just carry her. He smiled at the coachman, but on the inside, he was scared for his life. There was no telling what she might do to him if she woke up in his arms. The coachman accepted Shikamaru's reasoning and grabbed the couple's bags. Shikamaru held his breath as he picked up the sleeping monster and as gently as he could lift her out of the carriage. Once again, he was amazed with himself at his ability to avoid disturbing her. Now all he had to do was carry her all the way to the hotel and to wherever their room was. This may be more troublesome than I thought. The friendly coachman beat Shikamaru to the front desk and got their room keys. Apparently, they were in a special honeymoon suite, the most expensive one to be precise. The suite was separate from the actual hotel and was located some distance down the beach. Shikamaru was about to drop Temari and give up carrying her right then, thinking there was no way he would be able to make it that far. The coachman, however, had keys to a cart that he could use to drive them down the beach to their suite. Shikamaru relaxed and followed the tiny man to the cart. It was a small contraption, nothing like Shikamaru had ever seen before. It looked like two benches connected with a wheel in the front. The coachman put their luggage in the back where there was a small area for storing things. Shikamaru sat with Temari lying across his lap on the backbench while the coachman sat in front and began driving them down the beach. With the strange vehicle, the trip took less than 5 minutes. Before saying anything, the coachman was off once more with the luggage and room keys. When he returned, he didn't have the luggage anymore and Shikamaru was just getting up from the cart with Temari in his arms. You 2 meters make a beautiful couple, sir. The coachman said with admiring eyes. Shikamaru tried to hide his disappointment. He probably says that to all the couples he chauffeurs. Thank you. He grinned. For everything, he added. The coachman's eyes brightened and he smiled. It was my pleasure, sir. He said, shocking Shikamaru with his ability to speak without a stutter. Have a nice honeymoon. Good luck to both of you. Shikamaru was still astounded by the sudden disappearance of the man's stutter and took a minute to respond. Oh, well, thank you, again. Good luck to you too. He smiled and waved the coachman goodbye. All of a sudden, Shikamaru was overwhelmed with exhaustion and felt like he might pass out. So he made his way into the suite, not taking time to take in surroundings, just trying to find a bed. Once he found the bed, he put Temari down. Then, without thinking about the consequences, he lay down beside her and within seconds fell into a deep sleep. She panted as he ran his fingers through her blonde hair. Stop. She tried sounding angry, but her voice wavered when his lips made their way to her neck. This time she put her hands in his hair and tried pulling his face away, but he was stronger than he looked and continued caressing her with his kisses. Again, she tried to push him away. He looked up this time and gave her a seductive smile. You can stop playing hard to get, you troublesome woman. I know you want me. And with that, Temari stopped fighting him. Temari woke in a daze. What a nightmare. She had no idea where she was or when she got there. Did I have any sake last night? She looked groggily at her surroundings. That is when she noticed Shikamaru was sleeping next to her. Temari screamed and without thinking about it kicked Shikamaru off the bed. There was a loud thump and then silence. Temari laughed to herself, but after a moment of silence, she peered over the edge of the bed to see an unmoving Shikamaru. Oh no, I think I killed him, Shikamaru? She whispered. Are you dead? She leaned over the edge a little more and reached down to shake him. Before she could do anything, something caught her arm and pulled her onto the floor with him. Ow. Shikamaru sat up and glared at her. I have never seen him this angry before. This should be interesting. What is your problem? He shouted at her as he got to his feet. You surprised me, that's all. She pouted and rubbed her elbow as if she were in pain. I was sleeping. Some kunoichi you are. My comrade is sleeping next to me. I think I'll push him off the bed because even after all my years of training and S-class missions I am terrified to see my husband sleeping next to me. He spoke in a high-pitched whiny voice to mock her and managed to say it all in one breath. Temari frowned. If you had a dream like the one I had, you would freak out too, she wanted to say, but there was no way she actually would for fear of embarrassment. Therefore, instead of answering him, she got up and walked into the dining area of their suite. On the table, there was a vase of red roses and a note folded in half. Newlyweds, it said on the front. Temari opened it and read it aloud. Shikamaru and Temari, I am very proud of you for making it this far. I hope you enjoy this vacation, Temari scoffed. Vacation? says her. Enjoy your stay in Hamashin and good luck. Tsunade. She rolled her eyes. Don't forget to act like a couple when in public. You never know who you might run into. Shikamaru was leaning on the doorframe looking unconcerned and still slightly angry. Sounds troublesome. Do you think she sent someone to stalk us? Temari said sarcastically, trying to lighten the mood. Her husband shrugged and walked over to the luggage. It's possible. He has to be kidding. Temari shuddered. Right, well, let's just spend the day at the beach. Not much can really go wrong there and we won't have to interact much. Fine. He took his things and without saying another word went into the bathroom. With a sigh, Temari grabbed her luggage and marched into the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Shikamaru finished changing first and decided to wait by the glass doors that led to a patio on the beach. They had slept through the morning and it was well into the afternoon now. The sun would be setting in a few hours. Maybe this vacation won't be so bad after all, he thought, trying to look on the bright side of things. After all, relaxing and watching the clouds and sunset is one of my favorite things to do. He was starting to believe himself, but his troublesome wife finally came out of the bedroom and all of his happy thoughts vanished. She had wrapped her torso in a beach towel and was carrying a blanket and a bag. Take this stuff, she said sternly as she shoved the bag and blanket into his arms. You're the husband, it's your job. That's a little sexist, don't you think? He asked, even though he would have carried the stuff anyway. Temari grinned, like I care. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and walked out to the beach. He placed the blanket down a couple yards from the water's edge and put the bag down next to it. He sat down on the blanket and stared at the bag. What do you have in there? He asked as Temari approached the blanket. She raised an eyebrow at him. Just stuff. HN. Shikamaru shrugged and noticed how she was still covered up. What's with the towel? Nothing. She said a little too quickly and blushed slightly, which didn't go unnoticed by Shikamaru. Oh, I'm not so sure about that. He grinned and stood up, then pretended to be reaching for the towel. Are you naked under there? Her eyes grew wide. Okay, fine. I'll tell you, she shrieked as she jumped back from him. I burn easily and don't want to take any chances. Her response made Shikamaru burst out laughing. Temari, you live in the desert. Why would you ever expect me to believe that? He asked, trying not to laugh anymore. Temari narrowed her eyes at him. Well, she stalled. Shikamaru got bored of waiting for her to think of another excuse and with one quick movement, he pulled her towel off. She definitely wasn't naked but she might as well be. Underneath the towel, she had been hiding a black bikini. A very thin black bikini that emphasized her bodacious figure. Why was it that even though she was the most intolerable person he had ever known, he still couldn't help but think she was beautiful? Shikamaru couldn't seem to answer that question, and now he was staring at her mostly exposed body. Temari was blushing furiously now but didn't steal the towel back from him. She wanted to slap him, but there were other people around and the last thing she wanted to do was cause a scene. She didn't know what to say, and neither did he. Thankfully, something caught Temari's attention so she could change the subject completely. You were right. That bikini is rather small but I wouldn't necessarily say you're naked, Shikamaru mumbled. She blinked at him a few times then shook her head. Not about that, you idiot. Tsunade did send someone to stalk us. Shikamaru's eyes grew wide and he started to turn around but Temari grabbed his face and made him look at her. Don't turn around. It's Naruto and Sakura and they're heading this way. Crap, Naruto is already suspicious about us. She couldn't have chosen anyone worse to send. He sighed. All right. The genius ran through a series of plans in his head and quickly chose the best one. Okay, you can grab my hand and pull me, who is unwilling, towards the water. Try to be flirty about it though, then. Temari cut him off. Shut up, that's ridiculous and stupid. I have a better idea. Oh really? He asked sarcastically, what exactly do you place? Before he could finish the question, Temari had jumped up, wrapped her legs around his waist, and put her arms around his neck. I'm going to kiss you. I figured I'd give you some warning, unlike someone else I know. Shikamaru hadn't been able to say anything before her lips found his. This kiss was remarkably like the one they had shared at their wedding. Perfect. Are we interrupting something? Naruto asked in an amused tone. Their lips separated and Temari put her feet back on the ground but their bodies remained close. Shikamaru grinned and put his arm around Temari's shoulders and their eyes met for a brief second. Not at all. Temari stifled a laugh. What are you two doing here? Sakura stepped forward. Well, I've been dying to come here, and I heard it was amazing. And Granny Tsunade gave us some vacation time for once. Naruto cut in with a smirk. If we had known this was where you two were going on your honeymoon, we would have gone somewhere else, but Tsunade is the only one who knew where you'd be going. Sakura's tone was apologetic and sincere. Oh, don't worry about it. We could spend some time together, it would be nice. Temari smiled. Shikamaru admired her acting skills. Sakura half smiled. We couldn't. This is your honeymoon, you two should spend some time alone. It's fine, Sakura. We've spent enough time alone in the past few years. Shikamaru grinned. It'll be great to spend time with you too. Well, if you insist, Naruto answered without a pause. We were just going for a walk down the beach. Do you two wanna come with us? They reached for each other's hands and gave one another a knowing smile. Sure. They answered at the same time. We'd love to. Temari put the blanket and bag back in the suite. Before the walk she had to put on a pair of shorts anyway. After she changed, the two couples went on a pleasant walk down the beach. They talked, joked, and seemed to be having a good time. They even stopped to watch the sunset. Shikamaru was starting to think they might be able to pull it off. That was until Temari spotted another familiar face. An ex-boyfriend this time. His name was Jiro and they had been pretty serious, or Temari thought they were. Jiro had cheated on her with one of her old comrades. She never really got over it. Temari tried to hide her face in Shikamaru's chest so Jiro wouldn't see her. It was a failed attempt though, because sure enough he had spotted her and was walking their way. Kiss me. She whispered into Shikamaru's ear. He looked at her with a blank stare. He had been talking to Naruto so he had no idea where that request had come from. However, when he saw her pleading look he couldn't help but give in. This kiss wasn't quite as meaningful as before. Temari was definitely forcing herself upon him and Shikamaru was having a difficult time keeping up, so he pulled away. What are you? Temari. Is that you? She tensed, and then reluctantly turned around to face her ex. Jiro. She faked a smile. Long time no see. You're telling me, he chuckled. How have you been? What are you doing here? Who is this fella? Temari had always hated how jubilant he was. Could someone really be that happy all the time? She doubted it, but Jiro had always proved her wrong. She felt awkward and didn't know what to say. Then she looked up at Shikamaru who was questioning her with his eyes and she knew exactly what to do. I'm absolutely wonderful, she said with a little too much enthusiasm. I'm actually here on my honeymoon and this fella here is my husband. She smiled brightly at Shikamaru and kissed his cheek, then looked at Jiro once more. Jiro smiled at her. Congratulations. He winked at Shikamaru. You're one lucky dude. Thanks. Shikamaru mumbled. He felt awkward and confused and wished that Temari would explain to him who this guy was. So what are you doing here? Temari asked Jiro. Oh, I'm here with Ima. Ima was Temari's comrade that Jiro had an affair with. But we're not on a honeymoon or anything special like that. Jiro said as if to justify himself. We're just here for a few days. Shikamaru was starting to figure out what Temari's relationship with this man was and why she was acting so weird. He didn't like that she was using him like that, not at all. Look, Temari. Sounds fun. She blatantly ignored Shikamaru and continued her conversation with Jiro, which she continued to do for the next several minutes. Occasionally, she would use him as a prop, squeezing his hand, kissing his cheek, or running her fingers through his hair. Jiro didn't seem to notice. Shikamaru had had enough so he tugged only semi-gently on Temari's arm so she looked at him. I'm getting tired. Do you want to go back to the suite? His tone made the sentence a command rather than a question. Temari blushed slightly under his intimidating gaze. Yeah. I guess we better go. It was good seeing you, Jiro. She waved goodbye to her ex-boyfriend while Shikamaru explained to Naruto and Sakura that they would be turning in for the night and would see them some other time. The walk back to their suite was awkward and silent. Once they finally arrived at the suite and were inside, Temari decided to break the eerie silence. So, what are our plans for tomorrow? Shikamaru paused in the doorway to the dining room. You're asking me? He asked snarkily. Temari sighed. Okay, you really need to get over that. She did feel bad about it though, which was weird, and she felt worse that he wouldn't let it go. There's no way in hell he is going to know that. After you apologize, he sneered. Fine. I am sorry that I used you like that, she said sincerely. Now I don't have to feel bad anymore. Then, she glared at him. You act like I'm incapable of apologizing. He shrugged. I thought you were. Shikamaru turned and looked out the window. Still, it's not like you care about my opinion at all. Temari marched over to him. Look, hubby. She poked at his chest and looked him in the eye. I've been trying to be a decent wife and make this pathetic excuse for a relationship work. His face was tense and he turned his head away from her, but she put her hands on both sides of his face and made him look her in the eyes. I know you don't love me and never in my life could I love someone like you, but can we at least try to be friends? Why did she feel wrong saying that? She shook the thought away, afraid she might answer the question. I know I'm probably the last person in the world you'd want to be friends with, but you and I both know that would make this mission a whole lot easier. Somehow, during her speech, she had made her way closer to him and they were now only inches apart from each other. Images of him leaning down to kiss her flooded her mind. She did not step back though. Instead, she stayed there and continued holding his gaze. After a minute, Shikamaru grinned and took her hands from his face. He lowered his head to hers and leaned in. You're right. He whispered in her ear. Then, he dropped her hands and moved around her. Still standing a few feet away, he continued. I don't love you. And you are the last person in the universe I would want to be friends with. However, seeing as we will probably be stuck on this mission for quite some time, I will tolerate you. That's it. I guess I deserve that much. Temari muttered. Believe me, you deserve much less than that, he jibed. I cannot wait for this stupid mission to end so you'll be out of my life. He threw his hands in the air in frustration and left the room before she could say anything. Temari stood there, frozen for a few moments. Part of her was hoping he would come back and apologize, tell her that he didn't mean a word of what he just said. She knew that wouldn't happen though and dragged herself to the bedroom. Why did I have to screw up so badly? She kept asking herself. She had been mean to him before, but what she did tonight was low. Obviously, he could accept her rude comments, but after a stunt like that he didn't even want her in his life anymore. Suddenly, Temari knew what it felt like to be completely and utterly alone. Shikamaru woke the next morning to an impossibly bright glare from the sun. He looked directly across from him, out the glass doors and at the sun rising over the ocean. I could definitely get used to waking up to this. He lay there for a few more moments gazing at the beautiful, calm horizon. Temari should see this. As he thought her name, the realization of everything that had happened the night before came crashing down upon him. Shikamaru grimaced as though something were causing him physical pain. How could I say such horrible things? He thought, reprimanding himself. Sure, she was a cold-hearted, selfish woman, but she hadn't done anything to deserve such cruel words. I have to apologize. Shikamaru reluctantly dragged himself off the couch and slowly but surely made his way to Temari's bedroom. Would she forgive him? Would she be angry? Shikamaru feared the answers to these questions. However, it appeared as though he wouldn't get those answers anytime soon, because when he opened the door to Temari's room, she was nowhere to be seen. The bed looked like no one had slept in it and her luggage was gone. Maybe she just unpacked her things. Shikamaru checked the closet and dresser for any of Temari's belongings but found none. He checked each room in the suite for some sign that his wife had not abandoned him, although that seemed to be the situation. Her luggage was nowhere to be found and there was no note indicating where she went or whether she would be coming back. Shikamaru hoped that Temari wouldn't abandon the mission and would be coming back soon. However, part of him already knew that she wouldn't be coming back at all. In spite of that, he decided to go search for her anyway. This search included walking up and down the beach 3 times, since he did not know where else to look. He was about to start his 3rd trip along the beach when he spotted someone with pink hair. Sakura, he called, hoping that it was actually her and not someone else. She turned around and Shikamaru was relieved. It was Sakura. He jogged over to her and she greeted him with a cheerful, hello. Hi. He smiled and paused as he tried to think of a way to phrase his next question without sounding suspicious. Where's Temari? Sakura asked. Shikamaru groaned inwardly. I was just about to ask you if you have seen her, actually. She told me she was going to some souvenir store or something and that she would meet me for lunch, but I haven't the slightest idea where this place is. He looked around, hoping that he had been convincing. Sakura laughed lightly. Well, there are quite few souvenir shops around here. Most of them are over that way. She pointed past Shikamaru's head. So, that would probably be the best place to look. Okay. Thanks, Sakura. Good luck. She waved as he walked off towards the stores she had pointed to. Shikamaru knew it was pointless and that he wouldn't find her, but figured that while he was there he might as well look. He had been right. After checking each store, he found that Temari wasn't in any of them. He even asked each of the shop owners if they had seen her. Each of them responded with something like, sorry but no, I haven't seen her. After that disappointing search, Shikamaru had given up and made his way back to his suite. Once he was almost there, he noticed another souvenir shop. Already knowing it was futile, he decided to check the shop anyway. This shop was much bigger than the others were, so it took him much longer to walk around all the aisles. Still, There was no sign of Temari. Now all he had to do was ask the shop owner. As he approached, the woman behind the counter perked up as if she hadn't seen a customer for a very long time. "Are you looking for someone?" the woman asked in an overly happy tone. Shikamaru hesitated for a moment. How did she know? Actually, yes I am. The brunette became even perkier. "Pretty blonde lady? About this tall?" She gestured with her hand at about Temari's height, hair in 4 pigtails. She made another gesture around her head, which Shikamaru thought was a failed attempt at Temari's pigtails. His expression became bemused. He was baffled. Had this woman actually seen Temari? Yes, was she here? He asked a little too eagerly. Yup. She smiled. Shikamaru paused, waiting for her to continue. When she didn't, he proceeded to ask, when was she here? She thought for a moment and tapped a beat Shikamaru did not recognize, then said, "Well, she was here real LLLLLYY late last night, well, this morning really, and then she bought some stuff, and then she left." This information wasn't really helpful at all to Shikamaru. How troublesome. Then the sprightly shop owner added, "I knew you must have been looking for her though, because you look almost as glum as she did." Shikamaru frowned. He still did not understand how he could have hurt her so badly. It was not like him to let his anger get the best of him like that. "Did you see which way she went?" No, for the first time since she started speaking to him, the woman didn't sound cheerful. But if it helps any, her tone perked up a little. She bought a little statue of a sand castle, and a seagull puppet. A sand castle and a puppet. It did not take a genius to figure out for who she bought those for, and now he knew where Temari had gone. Yes, that does help. It helps a lot. For the first time he noticed the shop owner's name tag. "Thank you, Lena. Thank you so much." Shikamaru couldn't contain his excitement. As he was rushing to get out the door, he heard Lena calling after him, "Don't forget to tell her you love her." Shikamaru hesitated for a few seconds, then nodded at Lena and carried on his way. Tell her that I love her. He almost laughed out loud. He did not hate Temari, and despite what he told her the night before, he might even consider her a friend. However, even the thought of loving her was absurd. The usually lazy shinobi got back to his hotel suite in record time. Deciding that bringing his entire luggage along would be too troublesome, Shikamaru only grabbed a few kunai and shuriken and hid them safely in his pockets. Next, he wrote a note to the coachman, assuming he would be back to pick them up at the end of their honeymoon. In the note, he told the coachman that him and Temari took a side trip and asked if he could bring his luggage back to Konoha. When he was finished in the suite, he put the note on the door, hoping no one would steal it and the coachman would comply with his request. Subsequently, he made his way nonchalantly out of Hamashun so as not to seem suspicious, and hoping more than anything he could get away without an encounter with Naruto. Fortune seemed to be smiling on Shikamaru today because he made it unnoticed out of Hamashun and was now sprinting as quickly as he was able to Suna. On the other hand, it was getting dark and he did not know how far Suna was from his current location. Once he reached the desert, he was relieved. On the horizon, he could see a small dot darker than its surroundings, and that, Shikamaru assumed, was Suna. Since he was starting to get tired, and the village was now in view, Shikamaru decided to slow his pace. The small dot on the horizon kept growing larger and larger. Shikamaru was getting anxious and was about to start running full speed again when suddenly someone was blocking him. He almost ran into the figure in front of him, but somehow managed to stop, mere inches from the stranger. That's when he sensed others were there too. He had been completely surrounded. How could I not sense them coming? How could I let my guard down like that? Shikamaru was already beating himself up when someone hit him from behind. He collapsed on his knees. Who are these people? He stayed on his knees, nothing bothering to get up, knowing it would only result in receiving another blow. This is troublesome. I can't sense their chakra at all. Whoever these thugs were, they apparently had experience with shinobi. That did not come across as surprising though, since they were so close to Suna. Someone was now swinging a blunt object at Shikamaru's head. He tried to dodge it, but noticed too late and was hit on his forehead. The powerful strike caused Shikamaru to fall face down into the sand. His head was throbbing and his vision blurred. While the bandits were talking, saying things that Shikamaru could not comprehend, he attempted to think of a plan to escape. His head was in too much pain though, and all of his thoughts seemed to swirl together, getting him nowhere. This is it, Shikamaru thought, knowing he screwed up and that these people were probably going to kill him. He would never get the chance to apologize to Temari. He had failed the mission. Someone kicked him on his side. There was a loud cracking sound and Shikamaru groaned in pain. There were more words spoken and he swore he heard a few of them laugh. Why can't they just end it? Just as Shikamaru started to lose consciousness, he sensed someone's chakra. A familiar chakra at that, though he couldn't quite figure out whose. At this point, he didn't really care. Whoever this person was, he just hoped that they were strong enough to defeat the bandits and get him out of this troublesome situation. The fallen shinobi had no time to think anything else before slipping into darkness. When Shikamaru began regaining consciousness, the first thing he noticed was how cold he felt. Although he knew better, he couldn't help but think, am I dead? Then his head started pounding and he knew he was alive. If he were dead, he wouldn't be in pain. As he started to shift his position, he realized that the reason he was cold was that he had been placed on a flat metal table. He also noticed that his shirt had been removed and that he had bandages wrapped around his torso. Opening his eyes for the first time, he knew exactly where he was, the infirmary in the Cage's tower. He knew this because he had been there a few times before, several years ago. It had not changed at all. The next task on Shikamaru's agenda was sitting up. He didn't know what his condition was, and if the bandits broke his ribs, then sitting up would be painful. Apparently, his ribs were broken, because as soon as he moved he was overwhelmed with excruciating pain. It did not last long, however, and he figured it wouldn't be a lasting pain, as long as he stayed still. This will be troublesome. I better do it quick. With one quick motion, he was sitting upright on the metal table. He cringed at the sudden pain. Why didn't they get a medic to heal me? Just as he thought it, the answer came to him. If you're wondering why a medic nin hasn't healed you, it's because Gaara wouldn't let Kankuro pummel you, so in return Kankuro won't let anyone heal you, says you deserve to feel like that. Shikamaru gaped at Temari. He was speechless. All he could do was stare at her like some sort of mirage. Just hours before he thought that he would never see her again, and now here she was. Although she looked different, but he couldn't decide if it was in a good way or a bad way. Temari looked over him, at his bandages and bruises, and then continued. I was going to try and sneak a medic nin down here, but Kankuro won't let any of them pass. She paused, maybe waiting for him to speak, maybe not. More than likely not. So I brought you this instead. She held up a smile vial filled with clear liquid. This time she didn't pause and wait for him to respond. She walked over to the metal table and sat down next to him, keeping some distance between them, and handed him the vial. It will numb the pain for a while. If you don't exert yourself, it might even last all day. Shikamaru couldn't help but notice that she would not meet his eyes. No matter how long he looked at her, she would only look at his bandages. Thanks. He took the vial and was about to drink its contents but hesitated just before the vial reached his lips. How do I know you're not trying to poison me? He asked sarcastically, trying to make her look at him, to make her smile. The kunoichi did not smile though. She answered him as if he were being completely serious, because you came. He hadn't been expecting that. He looked at her and frowned slightly. I came here to Apollo. You shouldn't have. Temari cut him off. I was horrible to you. If anyone should apologize, it's me. Shikamaru scoffed. No, definitely me. I shouldn't have said such hurtful things to you. That guy obviously hurt you in the past and I should have been more understanding. This time Temari scoffed. Yeah, but I used you. That was stupid. I should have taken your feelings into consideration. I have always been rude and inconsiderate towards you. If I hadn't used you like that. She cringed. If I hadn't been so selfish, you never would have gotten hurt like this. He was beside himself. She actually cares. He shook his head. Look, this is entirely my own fault. Shikamaru gestured at his bandages. I let my guard down. This isn't your fault at all. And if anyone is selfish, it's me. I said those things without thinking about how it would affect you. And he didn't know if he could finish that sentence. And she urged him to continue. And what? I didn't mean it. I wouldn't mind being your friend. I might even. And look at us. We're fighting just like a real married couple. He grinned and was relieved to see she was smiling a little too. See? We're perfect for this mission. We can't just end it here. Temari nodded. You're right. Now, drink that. She pointed at the vial that was still in Shikamaru's hands. And let's go tell Gaara we haven't given up yet. Shikamaru quickly downed the contents of the vial and stood up, amazed at how quickly and efficiently the medicine had worked. Okay, let's go. Without another word, they left the infirmary. The silent walk was mostly pleasant, however, there was still some tension between them. Just before reaching the end of the hall, Temari stopped and, for the first time since he woke up, looked Shikamaru in the eyes. Look, Shikamaru. She turned her head slightly to the room ahead, and then looked at him once more. Kankuro is still out there keeping an eye out for any medics. She was whispering now, so Shikamaru had to lean in closely to hear her. He's still mad at you and is probably going to say some harsh things to you.
Shikamaru grinned. Something tells me I can handle some verbal abuse. Temari shrugged. I was just warning you. Then she continued into the next room where, as she said, Kankuro was waiting. Where do you think you're going? The puppet master allowed Temari to pass but got in Shikamaru's way, blocking him like a brick wall. Why did I never notice how big he was before? Shikamaru stepped back. Temari and I are going to talk to Gaara about our mission. Kankuro threw his head back in a fit of laughter. What mission? As far as I'm concerned, you already blew it. She left you. I don't understand why you even bothered coming here. It's not like she's going to go along with this mission anymore after.
Kankuro. Temari said his name with such authority and glared at him with such intensity that Shikamaru almost felt bad for the guy.
What Temari? You are not seriously going to continue working with him after what he did to you. Don't you remember? When you got here yesterday you were. That's enough. She interrupted him before he could go too far. There was no way she would let him tell Shikamaru how horrible he had made her feel. This is none of your business. Shikamaru and I are both willing to continue this mission for the sake of peace. If you have any objections, well then. She smirked and reached out for Shikamaru's hand. Shikamaru grinned and reached for her hand as well. Finishing her thought he added, you should have said so at our wedding. Temari nodded and turned towards the cage's office. Now excuse us. We're going to let Gaara know that wedding didn't go to waste. They both walked down the corridor leading to Gaara's office. As they walked away Shikamaru heard Kankuro muttering, should have let those bandits have him. Shikamaru grinned and shook his head, knowing that they were empty words. So as you can see, Gaara, Temari looked at Shikamaru, smiled, and then faced her brother again with a very serious expression. We have both decided to forget the unfortunate events of our honeymoon, and to go on with our mission. If that's okay with you. After a long, far too drawn-out explanation of everything that had happened and how the couple had come to forgive one another, Shikamaru and Temari thought they would get Gaara's consent without any problem at all.
On the contrary, the cage did not yet seem to be completely convinced. Temari, I'd like a private word with Shikamaru.
Temari's eyes widened slightly. She had not been expecting this. She anticipated a very straightforward, yes, you may continue with your mission. What could Gaara possibly want to talk to him about? She had been hesitating too long and Gaara was now giving her a very stern look. He was the cage now, not her brother, and she needed to obey his wishes. No matter how much she hated to. Fine. The stubborn Kunoichi sauntered out of the office without looking back. When the door closed behind Temari, Shikamaru waited patiently and nervously for the cage to speak. This is troublesome. What could the cage possibly want to talk to me about? He fidgeted slightly due to the uncomfortable silence. Finally, Gaara spoke. You did apologize to my sister, correct?
Shikamaru relaxed a little bit. Yes, Cage-sama. That was my whole reasoning for coming to Suna.
Gaara stood up and approached Shikamaru. As he got closer, Shikamaru noticed how his expression hadn't changed once since he saw him. Does he ever show any emotion? He fought back a laugh as images of an over-emotional Gaara flowed through his mind.
Shikamaru. Gaara stopped a few feet away from Shikamaru and stared questioningly into his eyes. I'm speaking to you as a friend, not the cage. He stopped and kept giving Shikamaru that questioning look. Before Shikamaru could say anything though, Gaara spoke again. I understand that Temari seems like she can take anything sometimes, but whatever you said to her the other night really got to her. I don't know what you said to her, she wouldn't tell us any details, but it obviously hurt her. He stopped again. This time Shikamaru was so beside himself he couldn't even try to speak. Yet again, he didn't have to say anything before Gaara started speaking again.
This may come as a surprise to you, Shikamaru, and she'll probably kill me if she finds out I said this to you, but I believe that Temari cares about you. If she didn't, what you said wouldn't have hurt her so badly and she wouldn't have come back to Suna. So, I need to know, before I can allow this mission to continue. His gaze was more curious than ever. Did you mean it, honestly and sincerely, when you apologized to my sister? At this, Shikamaru just grinned and looked down at his bandages. If I didn't mean it, he looked up to meet Gaara's inquiring eyes. Do you really think I'd be here right now?
Gaara nodded. Very well then. You too may. Gaara, Shikamaru interrupted. He still had one more thing he wanted to say. When Gaara's eyes were back on his he continued, this may come as a surprise to you, it sure as hell comes as a surprise to me. And I'll kill you if tell her I said this to you, but I care about Temari too.
The cage nodded again. Then I see no reason why you two cannot go on with the mission. Completely relieved, Shikamaru bowed his head slightly and said a quick, "Thank you," to Gaara before turning to leave the office. Shikamaru. Just as he thought he was in the clear, Gaara had stopped him. Reluctantly, the shinobi turned to face the cage another time. "Yes?
Let me get a medic in here to heal those wounds of yours." Gaara gestured at the bandages that were starting to come loose.
"Won't Kankuro be mad?" Shikamaru asked, only being half serious.
"Of course he will." For the first time, Gaara grinned, revealing the first sign of emotion Shikamaru had seen in him for a very long time. "But what can he do?" He pointed at the desk. "I'm the cage, remember?" Shikamaru smirked. "Then let's do this. What did Gaara want to talk to you about?" Temari had already asked Shikamaru several times since he left the cage's office.
Each time he gave her the same answer. This time was no different. "It's none of your business. She's so troublesome." This time, unlike the others, Temari had an argument. "Not exactly. We're married, remember? Your business is my business."
Shikamaru laughed and proceeded to set up his cot on the floor of Temari's bedroom. "Fine," he finally said without turning around. "He just wanted to know if I am as serious about this mission as you are. Since you do most of the talking around here." He turned around to give her a quick, pointed look, then continued setting up the cot.
"Are you serious?" Temari was slightly offended. To show her disappointment, she sat down on her bed and pouted.
After finishing with the cot, Shikamaru noticed Temari and her pathetic pouting. For some reason, it made him think of what Gaara had said.
"I believe that Temari cares about you. If she didn't, what you said wouldn't have hurt her so badly." Shikamaru felt a pang of guilt but at the same time smiled. "Hey," he said as he sat next to her on the bed. "I was kidding about you doing all the talking." Temari sighed and pulled her knees up to her chest. "I know, but if he had to speak with you privately just to ask you that, then it must be true." Look, he waited for her to actually look at him, which she did. "If I wanted to do all the talking, then I'd speak up, but I don't, so I let you talk. It's as simple as that. So cheer up because it doesn't bother me any." She blushed a little. "He's been so nice to me." Shikamaru noticed her cheeks turn pink and smirked. "Well then, I'm going to get some sleep. It's been kind of a rough day." He stood up, walked over to his small cot, and lay down. Temari lay down in her bed as well, and watched him for a few moments as he fidgeted around and tried to make himself comfortable. The cot was creaky and thin, probably not comfortable at all. She looked at her own bed, which was the most comfortable thing she had ever slept on and far too big for one person. "Shikamaru." The shinobi had finally laid still and groaned as her turn to face her. "What? Since you've just recovered, and that cot is so small." She looked around at her bed again and half smiled at Shikamaru. "You can sleep in the bed if you want. It's big enough, and surely much more comfortable than that, so, if you want." Shikamaru looked at her, unsure. "I don't think that's a good idea. What if I wake up in the morning and you forgot this offer and you hurt me?" "Like that would happen." Temari laughed, even though she knew that was a very likely possibility. "If you don't want to, then fine, sleep on that." She said it with revulsion. "I, however, am going to have a great night's sleep on my huge, comfy bed."
Shikamaru rolled his eyes and grabbed his pillow. Sure, his wounds had been healed, but he didn't think he could handle sleeping on that cot. "I suppose I can trust you." Still uncertain, he slowly made his way under the blanket on her bed and lay down. She wasn't lying. This bed was comfy, and there was still plenty of room between them. Satisfied, Temari rolled onto her side, facing away from her husband, and closed her eyes. For the first time since their mission began, she thought that maybe she could get a pleasant night of sleep. Temari, what could he possibly want now? She thought, irritated that Shikamaru had to bother her just before she fell asleep. She heard him roll over and then whisper, "Thanks. It's the least I could do, whatever," Temari murmured. Shortly after that, both of them drifted off into a very deep sleep. When Temari woke up in the morning, she was overcome with a strikingly warm sensation. With her eyes still closed, she smiled. "Maybe I should be nice to people more often, if this is what it feels like." Not yet ready to get out of bed, she curled up and squeezed her pillow, prepared to drift back into sleep. Only, once she squeezed her pillow, she realized that whatever she was squeezing wasn't nearly soft enough to be a pillow. Her eyes shot open. "Definitely not my pillow." Cautiously, Temari removed her arms from around her sleeping husband. Then, being even more careful than before, she moved over to the very edge of the bed. "There's no way I'm going to be able to get back to sleep now." She shuddered. In one quick, silent motion she stood up. After putting her robe on, she turned to look at Shikamaru.
Immediately her eyes were drawn to his exposed chest. She had seen him without a shirt a few times before, but never took the chance to really look at him. If she wasn't so good at keeping her stolid composure, her jaw might have dropped. Temari had expected that he would be bare, with nothing to look at. She had definitely thought wrong. Why haven't I ever noticed this before? Her eyes remained focused on his lean figure with perfectly chiseled muscles before wandering to his biceps. He wasn't overly muscular like some shinobi. Instead, he had a perfect athletic build that Temari found tantalizing. Slowly, she forced her ardent gaze to drift upward, and when her eyes reached his, she almost fainted. Good morning. Shikamaru stared at Temari with amusement in his eyes and a very smug smile. Temari almost couldn't speak. Relax. Maybe he just woke up. She took a deep breath and without revealing anything with her face asked, "How long have you been awake?" Shikamaru bit his lip, as if she just told a joke that only he understood. I'm not sure. Probably about an hour. His smile became even more smug than before. An hour? Temari lost all of her composure at that point and sunk against the wall. You're kidding. The muted phrase was all that escaped her lips. Nope. Shikamaru sat up in the bed and patted the spot next to him, hoping she would sit down. It was your idea to share a bed, remember? At first she thought that he was mocking her, but he was just pointing out a fact. Without arguing, she sighed and gave in, sitting down next to him. She didn't even bother avoiding his eyes. I'm sorry. I guess. She didn't know what else to say. What was the correct response to something like this? Her apology made Shikamaru laugh. Seriously? I was scared for my life, you know? That's why I didn't wake you up, he shuddered. Even though she knew he was partially kidding, the gesture made Temari smirk. It's good to know I haven't completely lost my reputation. I am sorry though.
Shikamaru's smug grin returned. It's okay. You were probably just cold during the night and needed something warm to cuddle up to. I am pretty hot. Whack. Temari didn't hesitate to slap him. She knew he was mocking her this time. She had no idea how to respond to that. You were a conceited jerk. A conceited jerk. Is that seriously the best I can come up with? Be that as it may. Shikamaru rubbed the place on his chest where she had slapped him. You were the one checking me out. He looked down at the red 5-star now forming on his chest, and apparently you can't keep your hands off me. That remark was completely unexpected from someone like Shikamaru, so Temari just stared at him, wide-eyed for a minute. Since when did you get so annoying? She finally managed to spit out. Then she proceeded to shove him off the bed. She also managed to throw a couple of pillows at him. Shikamaru couldn't take her seriously at all and laughed at her temper tantrum. Since when did you get so touchy? He thought his retort was rather clever and started laughing again. Temari buried her face in her palms and shook her head. What's the point? She sighed. You're so immature. But you're making it so easy. Shikamaru got back onto the bed. Well, a man of your stature shouldn't be making such inappropriate jokes. She tried to look at him seriously, but he had such a ridiculous smile on his face that she almost started laughing herself. Shikamaru shrugged. The past few days have been kind of rough. I'm just trying to lighten the mood. Temari sighed and smiled. I guess you're right. They sat together on the bed for a few silently complacent moments. Shikamaru seemed to be lost in thought, so Temari took this opportunity to strike. Before he could do anything to stop her, she had used even more force than before to shove him onto the floor. There was a loud thump and a grunt of pain. Temari laughed, satisfied with herself. Now we're even. Her husband slowly ascended from the floor and sighed, troublesome woman. This time though, he didn't say it with the disdain with which he used to. No, now he said it with a smirk, and it sounded more like a tease than an insult. Shikamaru couldn't help but notice that Temari was looking at him with an odd expression. What's she looking at? What? Temari smirked. It's just funny. Funny? Shikamaru sat down beside her on the bed again. His wife looked down at her hands in her lap. Well, not even 2 weeks ago we practically hated each other. Haha. How is that funny? The lazy shinobi sat back against the headboard. I still don't get it. Shikamaru, we're having a civilized conversation while you're sitting on my bed. She pointed out, last week I probably would have gauged your eyes out for even thinking about that. He snorted. You're right. If you think about it, it is kind of funny. They both smirked and enjoyed a few more moments of contented silence before there was a knock on Temari's door. Shikamaru was about to stand up and find out who it was, but Temari put her hand up to stop him. He gave her a questioning look. If it's Konkuro, then all that trouble the medics went through to heal you will go to waste. Without waiting for a response, Temari stood up and opened the door.
It was a good thing she had stopped Shikamaru, because it was Kankuro. Gaara wants to see you. He looked over Temari's shoulder and gave Shikamaru a look of reprisal. Both of you, right away. He didn't say another word before turning his back and walking away. Good morning to you too. Temari shouted caustically after him. After she closed the door, she went to her closet and picked out some clothes. You better get dressed, she said to Shikamaru before going into the bathroom that was attached to her room. Shikamaru got dressed automatically. He had to wear the same clothes as the day before since he hadn't packed any extra. Even if he had, the bandits probably would have stolen them. Once he was dressed, he sat down on the bed again. How could Kankuro still be so mad? All he could think about was the bitter look Kankuro had given him. When the kunoichi finished in the bathroom and saw Shikamaru sulking on the bed, she almost laughed. He looked like a sad puppy. What's eating you? Kankuro must hate me. His monotone and stark expression would have worried Temari if his reasoning wasn't so ridiculous. Temari approached Shikamaru and waited for him to look up into her eyes. You obviously haven't noticed that my brother is a bit melodramatic. Shikamaru opened his mouth as if to say something, but Temari shushed him. He thinks he has to be super protective of me because I'm his sister, but trust me, it's just an act. I promise, underneath the dirty looks, he's not really mad. She smiled to reassure him, then put out her hand. Let's go, we don't want to keep Gaara waiting. Him we actually have to worry about when he's angry.
Shikamaru nodded and took Temari's hand. Well, I guess we don't want that.
In the Cage's office, Gaara and Kankuro had been waiting patiently for the married couple to arrive. When they did, the tense atmosphere immediately got to both of them. Temari clenched Shikamaru's hand slightly. Something was wrong, very wrong. Gaara and Kankuro's stoic expressions, however, did nothing to reveal what that something might be. Had their staged marriage failed? Were other countries already planning war on Suna and Konoha? Whatever was going on, they were about to find out. Gaara clasped his hands together on his broad desk and got right to the point. This morning I received a message from Konoha. Apparently, Naruto and Sakura returned from their vacation early and Naruto brought some interesting information to the Hokage's attention. Shikamaru and Temari just stared at him blankly. Both of them knew where this was going, and it wasn't good for either of them. To make a long story short, Gaara continued in his usual monotone, Naruto knows everything. Shikamaru cringed and Temari closed her eyes. Their thoughts were synchronized. It's all my fault. I'm a failure. On this note, the cage hadn't quite finished yet. Tsunade has requested that you two return to Konoha immediately. Furthermore, Kankuro and I will be accompanying you. There is still much to discuss, but that will have to wait until we reach Konoha. Pack your things, we will depart at once. The two nodded at Gaara and left the office without a word. Saying anything now would only make more trouble for them.
Instead, they retreated to Temari's room once more and packed their things in silence.
Actually, Temari packed her things while Shikamaru watched. He would have helped, but he was too busy reprimanding himself for being stupid enough to let something like this happen. What could have given us away? He went through the events that occurred during their short time together at Hamashin. Nothing struck him though. Perhaps, it was simply that they didn't have any chemistry, and it was so obvious to Naruto that he figured everything out from there. No, that couldn't be it. Shikamaru shook the thought. Naruto wasn't that attentive. He was suspicious since the beginning though. Maybe Naruto was more observant than Shikamaru was giving him credit for.
While Shikamaru had been over-contemplating the issue at hand, Temari had finished packing. She was the one to break the intense silence. Are you ready?
It took him a little more than a minute to respond. He was still thinking. Oh, yeah. She nodded and grabbed her bag, but before actually leaving the room turned to ask him, what do you think will happen to us? She wanted to add. Shikamaru had spent so much time thinking about how Naruto figured them out to think about what was going to happen. Now, thinking about the future, he was perturbed. What will happen? To the mission? To our countries? He became unsettled at another realization. What will happen to us? Their relationship had progressed so much since their reunion less than 2 weeks ago. At this point, he had a hard time imagining his life without her. I think that we'll be able to convince Naruto to keep his mouth shut. He half smiled. That might be true. And if we can't? Well, he sighed, we could renew the treaty. Temari nodded, but still looked doubtful. All right. She nodded again and began walking out the door. Temari. Shikamaru put his hand on her shoulder and stopped her. She looked at him expectantly but didn't say anything. If worse comes to worst, no matter how troublesome it might be, I think we can manage to stay in touch. He didn't need to say it, but he wouldn't have felt right if he hadn't.
Apparently, that was the reassurance Temari had been waiting for because a weak smile played at her lips. Of course, hearing that had made her feel a lot better, and now as she walked towards the Cage's office with her husband, she felt confident that everything would turn out okay.
The trip to Konoha had been an awkward and silent one, cloaked by an ominous aura. Not a word was spoken amongst Shikamaru, his wife, or her two brothers. In fact, not even a glance was shared between them until they reached the Hokage's office, when Tsunade and Gaara gazed at Shikamaru and Temari with great disappointment.
Shikamaru was the first to speak. I might as well get right to the point. How did he find out?
Lady Tsunade didn't hesitate to answer. Naruto told me that you two spent some time with him and Sakura one day. He said something weird seemed to be going on because you two suddenly left. Then he mentioned the next day that Sakura bumped into Shikamaru, who was looking for Temari. After he hadn't heard from either of you all day, he said he went to your suite where you found a note on the door. A note to your coachman saying something about a side trip. Naruto, who you know has been suspicious of you since the beginning, began piecing things together, and well, that's when he came to me. It is my fault. Shikamaru cringed slightly. I'm the worst shinobi ever. The weight of the situation almost caused him to collapse, but he still had some dignity that he wanted to maintain and kept his composure as best as he could. Kankuro scoffed. Well, if you ask me, this is all Nara's fault. Kankuro. Gaara snapped at his brother and gave him a warning look. If you are going to continue with this ridiculous tirade against Shikamaru, then I suggest you leave.
He must have known that he really didn't have an option, because without so much as a backwards glance Kankuro left the room.
After he was gone, Gaara spoke again. I apologize for my brother's behavior. Shikamaru gave Gaara a slight nod of appreciation. He was starting to doubt what Temari said about Kankuro not really being mad. There was an intense silence now that Kankuro was gone. Temari decided to break it by asking the question that had been nagging at the back of her mind since they left Suna. What's going to happen now? The Hokage and the Kazekage shared a quick glance. Then after a quick nod, Tsunade began to speak once more. Gaara and I have already discussed the options. She paused.
Why doesn't she just get on with it? Temari was beginning to feel anxious. And they would be. She urged the Hokage to continue.
The first option, obviously, was to continue the mission anyway. We would simply fill Naruto in on everything and tell him if he told anyone it would ruin the peace of the shinobi world. The plan sounded completely reasonable, but for some reason Tsunade's tone sounded pessimistic. But Shikamaru had a feeling he knew what she would say next.
Tsunade gave Shikamaru a dismal smile. But, we've already tried taking that plan into action. Naruto didn't respond well. You know how rash he can be.
Lady Tsunade, Temari cut in. I don't mean to be rude, but could you please just get this over with? Right. The Hokage nodded at Temari. For the most part, Naruto refuses to cooperate. He says forcing people to marry is over the line, and if we allow this mission to continue he'll tell everyone what we're doing. That's ridiculous. How else are we going to prove that the alliance between Suna and Konoha isn't faltering? Temari asked, incredulous to Naruto's stupidity. That's why we're going with the second option, Gaara stated. Shikamaru responded automatically, renew the treaty.
Tsunade nodded. Precisely. The Hokage's office was overwhelmed with an eerie silence as Shikamaru and Temari took in this information.
What does that mean for us? Temari asked, even though she was pretty sure she already knew the answer. Tsunade and Gaara gave each other a solemn look. They were about to answer when, once again, Shikamaru answered for them. It means that our marriage is over. You get to go home, and we both get to carry on with our normal lives, as if this whole mission never happened. His tone and his face were both very stoic. There was no indication whether or not he was happy that the mission was over. That their newly developed relationship was over. Temari found that slightly perturbing. Yes. Tsunade confirmed what Shikamaru had said. However, since today has been such a long day for all of you, I highly suggest that Gaara, Temari and Kankuro stay in Konoha for tonight. It's not exactly a short trip back to Suna, and I think it would be beneficial for you to rest before going back. Gaara nodded slightly. I agree. Temari and Shikamaru didn't have the chance to speak before Tsunade came to a conclusion. Very well then. I'll arrange a place to stay for Gaara and Kankuro. Shikamaru, Temari, you two can stay in your house if you so please. Neither husband nor wife protested, and without speaking to anyone they both left the Hokage's office. A solemn aura had fallen upon them, knowing it would be their last night together. This is driving me crazy. Temari threw her arms up in frustration as she paced across the bedroom. If they can renew the treaty just like that, then why didn't they just do that in the first place? Why did we even have to go through with this stupid mission? Was their goal to torture us, or are they just that stupid? Hello? The enraged Kunoichi stopped in front of the bed where Shikamaru had been laying since they got home. Are you even listening? Shikamaru had only been half listening, actually. He hardly even noticed when she began kicking the bed in frustration. He was lost in his own train of thought, which was surprisingly similar to hers. I'm certain they've been aware of the treaty all along. He couldn't shake the thought. Why would the cages agree to this mission if they knew there was an alternative? Perhaps they needed time to organize the treaty before anything was decided? That was unlikely. Renewing a treaty wasn't a long or complicated process. I wonder if they ever even thought about renewing the treaty, or if they're actually that ignorant. He spoke his thoughts out loud. The next thing he knew, he was on the floor, again. That's what I just said, you idiot. Temari glared at him from the opposite side of the bed but didn't say another word. She stood there, fuming at Shikamaru, who still sat on the floor, staring right back at her. Neither of them moved, neither of them said anything. Eventually, Temari's anger faded and she broke eye contact with the shinobi, who still hadn't got off the floor. Could you please say something? The fair-haired Kunoichi asked as she sat on the bed. Shikamaru continued to sit on the floor. He raised an eyebrow at her, then looked at the floor, then back at her. It was fairly obvious what he wanted. Seriously. Temari sighed and shook her head. You're so childish. I'm not apologizing. The shinobi simply raised his eyebrow even further while keeping a completely straight face and not saying a word. This went on for a while, and it seemed as though neither husband nor wife was about to give up. Fine. It was Temari who broke the intensified silence. I'm sorry I pushed you off the bed, again.
The muttered apology was enough to get Shikamaru off the ground. That could have been a little more heartfelt, but I'll take it. He reclaimed his spot on the bed and lay back down. What now?
Temari looked at him with a thoughtful gaze. What do you mean? All of that stuff you just said before, about this stupid mission, and it being torture. Shikamaru couldn't find the gumption in himself to look her in the eyes. So he stared at the ceiling and hoped she wouldn't think anything of it. Were you serious? I'm sure she was. She probably just wants to go home and forget this whole thing. Huh? She scoffed and rolled her eyes. Are you serious? This remark got Shikamaru's attention and he looked right at her. She was smiling. He suddenly felt very naive. I don't know. His sheepish response only made Temari smirk. I was just pissed, okay? It was so sudden, I mean. Her voice drifted off and her smile faded as the realization of everything suddenly hit her. This is our last night together. Shikamaru answered automatically, as though he had read Temari's mind. Look, maybe we should just turn in for the night. We've both had a long day and we can talk in the morning. He shifted slightly and started to sit up.
No, wait. The Kunoichi turned suddenly and pushed him back down.
He stared up at her with wide eyes, but he waited. Temari's cheeks turned pink. I can't believe what I'm about to say. I remember. Shikamaru sat up and raised an eyebrow suspiciously. Remember what? 6 years ago, when you escorted me home and I. Her cheeks reddened. She never planned on telling him that she actually remembered. When you know. No, I don't know. He replied sarcastically and leaned back on his elbows. Enlighten me. When For some reason she couldn't get the words out, and the way he was watching her didn't help. When I did something. Shikamaru simply blinked. Of course he already knew what she was talking about, but she wasn't getting away that easily. He was going to make her say it one way or another. Oh really? He rubbed his chin. I don't think I remember what you're talking about. What exactly did you do? Temari bit her lip. And he calls me troublesome. She could understand why he was being so difficult though. She would have done the same. Well, you see. Why can't I just admit it? She didn't think it would be so hard to say. Then, without actually realizing what she was doing, she felt herself being pulled closer to Shikamaru. There wasn't anything she could do about it. It was like some magnetic pull. Opposites attract. She smiled at her own joke.
They were only inches apart now and Shikamaru wasn't pulling away. To her surprise, Shikamaru put his hand on the small of her back and closed the distance between their bodies. Now she was lying on top of him. Now, what was it you were about to say? He spoke in a captivating tone and gave her an alluring smile. This. Temari closed the distance between their lips. Nothing could compare to this. Their other kisses, although nice, had been staged and forced. This one, however, was natural and felt so extraordinarily wonderful that they found themselves stuck in that moment. Everything felt perfect as they embraced each other and their lips molded together.
If it weren't for their need to breathe, then perhaps they would have kissed each other forever. Unfortunately, that wasn't so, and once they were finished, not another word was spoken. Anything they wanted to say had already been said. Speaking would just ruin the moment. They continued to hold each other until they fell asleep. Any negative thoughts about their current situation had completely vanished from their minds. Temari woke up the next morning almost exactly like she woke the morning before. Her head was resting against Shikamaru's chest and her arm was draped across him. This time, however, she didn't try to get away before he noticed. She embraced the moment, snuggling closer to him. As she did so, Shikamaru's arm shifted around her, accepting the embrace, and that's when she noticed that he was also awake.
She looked up at him with a dreary smile, which he returned.
"Good morning," he whispered and began brushing his fingers through her tangled morning hair. Temari rested her head against him again and began tracing his chest with her finger. He had quite a few scars from all his years as a shinobi. Most of them were minor though. Medic nins could easily fix scarring. What I wouldn't do to go on normal missions again, this reminded her, I have to go home today. The shinobi's hand stopped moving through her hair. Oh. Temari could feel his chest rise and fall dramatically as he sighed. I almost forgot, he said solemnly. She stopped tracing his chest. Me too, this sucks. She couldn't take it anymore. There must be something I can do, something I can say to fix this. Without another thought she stood up and got dressed.
Where are you going? Asked a yawning Shikamaru. I am going to talk to Gaara. Temari answered boldly. I'm going to try to fix this stupid mess. I mean, neither of us wants this to end, right?
He shook his head. Not anymore. Exactly. The determined Kunoichi sat on the bed and grasped her husband's hand. So if I can convince Gaara that ending our marriage is a mistake and that we don't even need the treaty, well, maybe it won't have to. Shikamaru brought Temari's hands to his face and kissed them softly. You're right. He started to get up. We can talk to him together. No, I think it'll be better if I talk to Gaara alone. She responded sheepishly. I have a lot to say. I'd rather speak to him privately. Shikamaru smiled and kissed her forehead. Okay, now go fix this. Temari nodded confidently and got off the bed. She hesitated when she got to the door and looked back at Shikamaru, who was looking at her curiously. The Kunoichi smiled and quickly made her way back to the bed and kissed Shikamaru sweetly on the lips. Not another word was spoken before she left the room. Temari walked the streets of Konoha towards the Hokage's tower. Tsunade never told Shikamaru or Temari where Gaara and Kankuro were staying, so she'd have to ask the Hokage herself. The guards outside of the tower acknowledged Temari with a curt nod and she walked right up the steps to the Hokage's office. She didn't even wait to get into the office to begin asking where her brothers were. Tsunade-sama. Would you mind telling me where? Oh. Temari stopped short. Gaara and Kankuro were already in Tsunade's office. Naruto was also there. Hi there, Temari-san. Naruto laughed. Bet you're glad I figured you guys out, right? Now you can go home and get away from that lazy pineapple head Shikamaru. Temari thought of the consequences she would receive for punching him. She didn't have time to actually do it though. Gaara cleared his throat. Naruto, I think it would be best if you left. What? Naruto turned to face his friend, the Kazekage. I deserve to be here as much as he does, he said, pointing to Kankuro. Naruto. Tsunade said sternly, leave. Naruto looked around and realized it was pointless. Fine. He pouted like a child as he turned to leave. Naruto looked at Temari on his way out. You're welcome. Temari glared at Naruto's back as he left the office. She turned to face the others in the room. They were all staring at her with curious expression. Right. The mission. What was that about? The Kunoichi found herself asking a different question than she originally planned. Naruto wanted to be here when we signed the official treaty. Tsunade held up a formally printed paper with signatures scrawled at the bottom. Oh. Temari's eyes widened. Am I too late? Didn't waste any time I see.
Kankuro raised a painted eyebrow at his sister. It's a long trip back to Suna, and we want to get home.
But, Gaara interrupted, first you need to sign your divorce papers. The Hokage held up another set of papers. There was a bunch of nonsense written on them and at the bottom there were 2 blank spaces for signatures. One for the wife. One for the husband. Wait a second. Temari thought as she looked at the papers more closely, but there's already a signature there. Shikamaru already signed his about a week ago. Tsunade said, so now all you have to do is sign, and then you get to go home. The Hokage smiled encouragingly, simple as that. A week ago. Temari's heart sunk. They hadn't been on this mission very long, but all the days seemed to blend together and she couldn't keep track of time. They had practically hated each other in the beginning, but a week ago? Surely they were getting along somewhat by that point. Could he really not stand her so much that he'd sign their divorce papers before they even really got to know each other? Was she really that unbearable? Temari clenched her teeth and pulled herself together. Obviously he didn't care about her as much as he seemed to, so she wasn't going to care about him either. Well, hand them over. She reached out her hand and took the papers and a pen, signing the first set of papers without a second thought. When she put her pen to the second paper she felt a sudden reluctance. It'll all be over. It was a bittersweet thought. Going home with her brothers, going on regular missions again. It was what she had been waiting for, what she'd wanted more than almost anything since this stupid mission started. But then again, she'd be leaving all of her new friends behind, her new home, and... No, her grip on the pen tightened. He wasn't thinking about me when he signed these papers. Why should I think about him? She looked up. 3 pairs of eyes were looking at her curiously. Come on, sis. Does your hand have a cramp or something? Konkuro asked sarcastically. Just sign the damn papers and let's get home. Tsunade was questioning Temari with her eyes, but she simply nodded and smiled with approval. Gaara didn't say anything, he just stared at her. He was the only one not pressuring her. Just do what you think is best, he finally said with a solemn nod. Temari smiled at her youngest brother, and then nodded. She knew what she had to do now. What could possibly be taking her this long, Shikamaru thought as he made his way across the village to the Hokage Tower.
After Temari left, the shinobi stayed in bed for a little while longer before getting dressed.
He'd wanted to go after her, to talk to Tsunade and Gaara with her, but she wanted him to stay home and he didn't want to face the consequences of disobeying her. When half an hour had passed, Shikamaru started to get restless and decided to make some food. When Temari got back they could sit down and enjoy breakfast together, their first breakfast as a happy couple.
He made the food, but she still didn't come home though. I bet it's Konkuro giving her a hard time. He had thought. The excuse didn't satisfy his nerves though. After all, even Temari had said that her father didn't really hate him, he just acted that way. Finally, after the food had gotten cold and he couldn't come up with another excuse, Shikamaru decided to go to the Hokage's tower himself. The tower was in his line of sight now and he quickened his pace. I bet she knew I'd come after her. He rationalized. That must be it. Of course. Temari knew him well enough now. She was probably sitting in Tsunade's office now, waiting for him to get there. Shikamaru. A shrill voice called from behind him. Shikamaru, hey. The shinobi sighed and turned around. How troublesome. Hello, Ino. Act like a stranger. Why don't you? Ino wrapped her arms around him and giggled. I haven't seen you in days and that's the greeting I get? He patted her on the back and pulled away smoothly, as not to offend her. Hey, it's good to see you. He grinned, but I have to go see Tsunade, it's kind of. Oh, Ino's hands flung to her mouth. Right, that. What do you mean, that? Shikamaru looked at his blonde friend with sheer confusion. Did you hear something? The kunoichi frowned and looked at her feet guiltily. Well, you know Naruto. Naruto. He put his hand up, stopping her. I get it. I'm so sorry, Shikamaru. Ino put her hand on his shoulder reassuringly. It sucks that Tsunade forced you to marry her like that. She shook her head shamefully. No, Ino, you don't understand. It's not really like that. Shikamaru scratched the back of his neck. Well, I guess it is, but it really wasn't so bad. He smirked, you see. Ino interrupted him with a fit of laughter. Wow, Shikamaru, I never realized you were such a good actor. She nodded in approval, but you don't have to pretend anymore. Naruto told us that you couldn't stand each other and that you were both miserable. Like I can blame you. I mean I wouldn't be able to stand someone if I were forced to marry them either. I can't believe the cages would do that to you too. She rolled her eyes. Well, good riddance, right? The shinobi just shook his head. She wasn't going to understand how complicated this whole situation was. Wait a second. Shikamaru gave her a curious look. Good riddance. Has the cage left already? She raised her eyebrows, as if surprised by the question. Well, I saw Temari go into the Hokage Tower a little over an hour ago. I just assumed that she was going to meet her brothers and then they were going to leave. She shrugged, but I didn't actually see them leave. So I suppose I could be wrong. She smirked. You know what they say about assume. Yeah, I get it. Shikamaru cut her off and started walking away. It was really good to see you, Ino, but I really have to get to Tsunade's office. He called over his shoulder. Ino yelled something at him as he purposefully made his way to the Hokage Tower, but he didn't hear what it was. Ino never saw them leave.
Shikamaru smirked. That means I was right, and she's still waiting for me. He couldn't help but feel smug. He really was a genius. The guards nodded at Shikamaru as he walked up the steps. Good to see you, Shikamaru. One of them greeted, but Shikamaru couldn't remember his name, so he just nodded and walked past. He reached the door to Tsunade's office in what must have been record time. Without knocking he entered. Sorry it took me so long to get here. Ino caught me on the way. Shikamaru. Tsunade was sitting at her desk filling out paperwork. I wasn't expecting you. Is there something I can do for you? Did you want another mission already?
Shikamaru stood stiff by the door, which slammed shut behind him. Tsunade was alone in her office. No Gaara, no Konkuro, no, she can't be gone. I wasn't aware that my current mission was over, actually. He finally managed to speak.
The Hokage gave a short laugh. Of course it is. Temari was here earlier to sign the divorce papers. Then she and her brothers left for Suna. Tsunade smiled at him. It's official, Shikamaru, you're single again. Divorce papers? It was a blur, but Shikamaru remembered them. It had been one of the days that Temari was out with the other kunoichis of Konoha and he had some time to himself. He'd come here, to Tsunade's office, to complain. I don't care how much she scares you, Shikamaru. She doesn't scare me, she just... Shut it, Nara. The Hokage gave him a pointed look. She wasn't in the mood. While I can't do anything about how much you can't stand each other, or how much she intimidates you, she held up her hand as he was about to interrupt her again. I can let you sign these. She held up 2 sheets of paper with a lot of nonsense written on them. What are they? He dared to open his mouth. Divorce papers. Tsunade placed them forcefully on the desk. Gaara and I had them printed just in case. She let the sentence hang in midair. Shikamaru shrugged, picked up a pen and signed the papers without hesitation. Tsunade looked them over and then locked them into a drawer in her desk. Very good. Now if the circumstances require it, Temari just has to sign the papers and you, Shikamaru, will be free. Thank you, Tsunade-sama, Shikamaru said gratefully before walking out of the office. That felt like a whole lifetime ago. Things were different now, but Tsunade couldn't possibly understand how different. And Temari. Oh crap. What had she thought when she saw that his signature was already on the papers? Obviously she wasn't very happy, considering her signature was on them too. She must hate his guts now. But that was a week ago. Did Temari not understand how quickly their relationship had changed? Or did she care about him since the beginning? In that case, seeing his signature on the divorce papers must have been like a punch in the gut. This is so troublesome. So many thoughts were weaving their way through Shikamaru's head. He couldn't concentrate and was starting to get dizzy. Shikamaru? Tsunade cut into his thoughts. Are you alright? He flinched back to reality. Am I alright? A hysterical laugh threatened to escape his lips, speechless. He managed to say without slipping up. His response satisfied Tsunade. I suppose that's good to hear. She smiled and gestured for him to get out. Go enjoy your freedom. Shikamaru grinned and started making his way out of the office. Thank you, Tsunade-sama. I will. After he left Tsunade's office, Shikamaru didn't know where to go. Going home would be pointless now that it was so empty. And he couldn't go to his parents' house. He couldn't face them right now. They had probably heard everything and he knew they'd be disappointed in him. What were Tsunade and Gaara thinking when they put us on this mission? Shikamaru shoved his hands in his pockets. Didn't they realize how this would affect us if everyone found out? But of course they hadn't. No one was supposed to find out.
Temari was lucky. At least her family already knew what she was getting into. He didn't think she had too many friends in Suna either, so she really didn't have anyone back home to judge her.
Without even realizing where he had gone, Shikamaru found himself in front of Choji's house. I wonder if he knows by now. With a shrug, Shikamaru knocked on his best friend's door. It took a few minutes but the door finally opened. Hey Shikamaru. Choji greeted cheerfully. Want to come in? Shikamaru half smiled. If Choji was inviting him and that meant Ino wasn't there. Thank goodness. Sure. Great. Choji chuckled and closed the door behind Shikamaru. He led him to the kitchen, of course. I was just about to make some lunch. Do you want anything? Sure. Thanks. He remembered that he hadn't eaten breakfast this morning and the sudden reminder made his stomach growl. As Choji started making food, Shikamaru sat down at the table without saying another word. He had missed his best friend and usually would have started joking around or something, but considering the circumstances, he just wasn't in the mood. Here you go. Choji had finished making some kind of meat and placed a plate in front of Shikamaru. It looked delicious, and Shikamaru started eating right away. Is there something wrong, Shikamaru? Choji asked midway through his meal, food splattered all over his pudgy face. What do you mean? He asked with a mouth full of food.
Well, you don't seem like yourself. Choji seemed to be struggling with his words, like there was something else he wanted to say.
Shikamaru sighed. I thought you already knew, Ino does. His best friend took a big bite of food before responding. I had heard, but I was wondering if there was more to it. More to it? He almost laughed. No, he lied, there really isn't much to it at all. Choji looked at Shikamaru. He clearly didn't believe anything he just said. Look, Shikamaru, you know you can tell me anything. So if there is anything you want to get off your chest, just let me know.
Shikamaru blinked at Choji a few times, and then he broke.
I just got a divorce from a fake marriage. No one was supposed to know it was a fake, but now thanks to that troublesome Naruto the whole village is talking about it behind my back. I'm going to be forever known as the shinobi who screwed up a fake marriage. He looked down at his hands. Not to mention, my father is going to be ashamed of me. His eyes grew wide suddenly and he slammed his face onto the table, and my mother, he covered his head with his hands. Do you have any idea what she's going to do to me? Choji could only laugh. Don't you think you're overreacting? I'm sure your mother won't react too harshly. He sat up and glared. Don't you underestimate her. That woman is a monster.
Shikamaru, Choji said pointedly. I think what you really need right now is a drink.
Shikamaru stopped glaring and nodded. I think you're right. It turns out that a drink was exactly what Shikamaru had needed. He'd only had a few shots and already he was feeling warm and fuzzy all over. Keep him coming. He slurred to the bartender. Don't overdo it, Shikamaru. Choji warned. He wasn't much of a drinker. HN. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and downed another shot. Don't be troublesome. He slurred the last word. I can handle my alcohol. I know. Choji laughed, but you know how you get when you're drunk. There was a sharp feeling in the pit of his stomach. Last time he'd gotten really drunk was before the wedding. Shikamaru frowned and took another drink to make the sharp feeling go away. Last time I was drunk, I saw a beautiful angel. His best friend smirked. An angel, huh? You must have been wasted. You really should be careful. But she was real, he replied, a little too loudly. His frown returned, but now she's gone. Why don't you tell me about this angel? Choji asked with genuine curiosity. He tilted his head to the side, but you've already met her. Choji raised his eyebrows at his friend. Shikamaru, is there something you didn't tell me earlier? Yes, Choji. By this point Shikamaru had realized that no amount of alcohol was going to make him feel better, but he took another drink anyway and then slammed his cup onto the counter. I fell in love with my wife. Shikamaru. Choji said excitedly, that's wonderful, now you just have to. I'm not doing anything. Shikamaru slurred, we both signed the divorce papers. It's so over, she's gone. Choji scratched his head, but if you love her then why did you? Long story. Shikamaru mumbled. Whatever the story is, that's not the point. The point is, you still care about her, and you can't just let the woman you love get away like that. Choji frowned, it's so pointless. He threw his hands up in frustration, it's all pointless, Choji. She didn't even say goodbye. Chasing her would just be troublesome. He picked up the glass again and gulped its contents. His friend rolled his eyes and was about to argue with him some more but he heard someone coming towards them and sighed, speaking of troublesome. It was Naruto. Hey guys. He waved excitedly as he approached. Celebrating the divorce, huh buddy? The oblivious shinobi asked and patted Shikamaru on the back. I knew something was fishy about that marriage, right from the beginning. He grinned triumphantly and took a seat next to Shikamaru. Shikamaru hiccuped, hate you. Naruto flinched and looked at Choji. What's his deal? Choji's eyes were wide. Nothing. He's just really drunk. He laughed nervously and patted Shikamaru on the back. I think you've had enough to drink for one day. Shikamaru squinted at Choji as if he were far away. I am not, really drunk. He was clearly lying, since he slurred every word. He turned to look at Naruto again. You're a tattletale. He giggled, ×9.
Hey, that was pretty good, Naruto laughed. Yeah, thanks to me you don't have to be married anymore. Great, isn't it?
Great? Oh, I'll show you something great. Shikamaru leaned back, clearly about to throw a punch at Naruto. Choji grabbed hold of him first though. Alright. That's enough, buddy. He smiled at Naruto. Sorry, I don't know what's with him. Guess he's had more to drink than I thought. I can see that. Naruto crossed his arms, looking unamused.
Yep, well, Guess I'll just take him home now. See you later, Naruto. Choji tried to sound cheerful as he dragged Shikamaru out of the bar. I think you should stay at my house tonight, he said once they got outside.
Shikamaru laughed, so we can have a slumber party? Choji shook his head, so I can keep an eye on you.
HN. He stumbled and almost fell over and started laughing. Man, I am so wasted.
Choji sighed, my point exactly. When he woke up the next morning, Shikamaru had a pounding headache. He sat up slowly, which only made his head hurt more. This isn't my bed, he realized when he looked around the room. Oh, right. The blurred memories from the night before came back to him. You're awake? Came a voice from the doorway. It was Ino. Shikamaru closed his eyes and rubbed his temples. Unfortunately, he grunted. Ino giggled. Choji told me about last night. Of course, when I got here you were passed out and drooling on the couch. Lovely. He mumbled. Wait a second, Choji told you everything about last night? Well, yeah, the blonde shrugged. He said that you were all depressed because everyone found out about your marriage being a fake and that you got totally wasted. She rubbed her chin. Oh yeah, and then you almost beat up Naruto. That's all? Shikamaru asked drowsily. That's all. Can you really not remember? She laughed. Wow, I can't believe you actually got that drunk. Yeah. He forced a laugh, me either, but he did remember last night, especially the part when he told Choji that he loved Temari. At least he didn't tell Ino. Just then, Choji walked into the room. Good morning, sleepyhead. He joked, I made breakfast if you want anything. Shikamaru shuddered. The thought of eating right now made him queasy. No thanks. He stood up and stretched. Actually, I think I'm going to head home. Thanks for letting me stay the night. Anytime. Choji smiled. Next time wait until after I get home to pass out. Ino added, you being drunk has got to be the funniest thing I've ever heard of.
Shikamaru rolled his eyes. I'll be sure to think of you the next time I'm about to get really drunk.
Yeah, you better, she called after him as he walked out the door. He barely made it off the front steps before walking into someone. Sorry, I wasn't. Oh, hi Dad.
Shikaku smiled half-heartedly at his son. I went to your house, but no one was home. I figured you might be here.
Oh. Shikamaru put his hands in his pockets. Last night was kind of. Choji asked me to stay the night. I understand. His father nodded. Let's go for a walk.
Okay. He didn't argue. He knew they needed to talk. After a few minutes of walking in silence, Shikamaru looked at his father and decided to start talking. Look, Dad.
Shikamaru. Shikaku interrupted. I don't need you to explain your marriage to me. Everyone else already has. He sighed and put his hands in his pockets. What I want you to explain is your divorce. My divorce? Shikamaru was confused. There was a treaty. There was no reason for us to stay married. Professionally, the older man started. There was no reason to stay married, but it was more than just a mission, Shikamaru. Dad, Shikamaru sighed. Don't lie to me. Shikaku spat. You can tell me you couldn't stand her as much as you like, and that may have been true in the beginning, but the whole marriage wasn't a lie. He looked knowingly at Shikamaru. Son, it was obvious when Temari first came to Konoha that you two didn't really love each other. I don't know how you managed to fool everyone else. Maybe they just didn't want to assume the worst. But that's not what matters now. What does matter is that you love her now. How did you? Shikamaru questioned his father with his eyes. I'm your father, Shikamaru. He smirked. I know you better than anyone, and I know that if you don't go after her, you are going to regret it for the rest of your life. That's kind of cliché, Dad. His son laughed. I'm serious, son. You can't just sit around, like the lazy bum you are, and wait for someone like her to come around again. Shikaku gave his son a sideways glance. It's not going to happen. He let out a long sigh. I know. Shikaku smirked. So are you going to go after her? Shikamaru stopped walking. They'd reached the village's gates. He nodded. Thanks, Dad. I'll be back as soon as I can. He had started to walk out of the village when he felt his Shikaku's hand on his shoulder. What is it? I didn't mean you should leave right now, Baka. His father chuckled. You're clearly still hungover and I bet you haven't eaten yet. Oh, right. Shikamaru laughed and rubbed the back of his neck. I should probably have some breakfast first. Don't worry about it. Shikaku put his arm around his son's shoulders and started walking further into the village. I'm sure your mother would love to cook something up for you. Shikamaru's eyes widened a little at the thought of seeing his mother right now. Yeah, he laughed nervously. Good old mom, the end. Thanks for watching. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.